Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
The reparations case. Ever since the end of slavery, Africans in America have been hoping for and seeking reparations for wrongs done against them for centuries. Initially, after the U.S. Civil War ended, Africans were offered 40 acres of land and a mule to work the land that they had worked without pay for centuries. This promise was never fulfilled. The great abolitionist and religious leader Sojourner Truth, who was once a captive, called for reparations, saying, "America owes to my people some of the dividends. I shall make them understand that there is a debt to the Negro people which they can never repay. At least then they must make amends." From the day it was first uttered to this day, literally in the shadow of bondage, the voices of black people called for reparations. It may surprise some, but the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. added his voice to that call. In his 1963-64 book, Why We Can't Wait, King wrote, "No amount of gold could provide an adequate compensation for the exploitation and humiliation of the Negro in America down through the centuries. Not all the wealth of this affluent society could meet the bill. Yet, a price can be placed on unpaid wages." King may not have said the word reparations, but he certainly stated the idea. Recently, the Movement for Black Lives, known also as the Black Lives Matter movement, issued a platform of issues important to black well-being. Among the issues raised, reparations for descendants of African captives. Even more recently, a United Nations working group of experts on people of African descent, working for some 6 years, has concluded that U.S. slavery was a crime against humanity, and the U.S. government should pay reparations to the descendants of those humans who were wronged. The UN experts met with members of half a dozen U.S. government agencies, including the Departments of Health and Human Services, Labor, and Justice. They visited several major American cities, north, south, east, and west. Reparations may have come of age after 2 centuries of being ignored and shunned. From Imprisoned Nation, this is Mumia Abu-Jamal.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Monday, October 10th, 2016, so I have been told. Slight delay to begin the program. I gave incorrect number to our guest. She was dialing in, so that held things up. That was my fault. That would, again, be another illustration. Strive for accuracy. Having correct information is very, very important. That's it. One thing I did want to make sure that I get in, there are lots of things happening in the world right now. The second presidential debate was yesterday, Hurricane Matthew and the destruction in the southeast U.S. Certainly hundreds of black people killed in Haiti, and just lots of things that are happening right now. The prosecutor, first black prosecutor in Brooklyn, as I understand it, Ken Thompson, he died today. He just like days ago announced that he had cancer, and then today it was reported that he died. And I thought that tragic loss. He was a father in addition to everything else. And he got a lot of attention earlier this year because of the Akai Gurley, Peter Liang case. Akai Gurley was shot and killed at the end of 2013 in the Pink Housing Projects. And 2014, sorry. But he was shot and killed by Peter Liang. Akai Gurley was a black male. Peter Liang, Asian male. Liang was found guilty. And then he was not sentenced to any jail time. And people were very upset about that and saying this is, the lack of value, contempt for black life again. We had programs talking about this and what have you, but Ken Thompson was the prosecuting attorney in that case. He did get the conviction, but he recommended no jail time. People were very upset about that. Ken Thompson, black male, and saying that he had sold out black people and name-calling him and all of that. And even I saw some of that today, which I just found extremely distasteful and non-constructive, to be talking about somebody on the day that they died because you disagree with, how they responded to racism. I just think that is really, really pitiful. And I'll say the same thing that I said again earlier this year, well before he passed, that Ken Thompson's body of work, if you look at what he did throughout his life, not just with the Akai Gurley case, Nafissatou Diallo, who was raped by Dominic Strauss-Kahn. He was involved in that case in trying to help her. The number of black people that he got out of prison alone, he made that like a centerpiece of his time as prosecuting attorney to make sure that black people that were wrongly convicted, that their case would be reviewed. And I mean, he literally got people out of jail and made that a central focus of his administration and talked about racism. Put his body of work up against many of the people that are criticizing him. I'm sure he is going to win many of those comparisons. Context of white supremacy. Our guest for today, in addition to being patient with Gus giving out false information, she did a project over the summer, kind of evolved from an experiment on social media. She made a web page where non-white people could make requests for resources, things that they need, and then whites could come in and supply those resources. It has been a fascinating experiment over the past few months. It's got a lot of attention. There were many, many articles and what have you written about this. The Guardian, the Washington Post, many other sites. She was a guest on Tavis Smiley. She was right here in my neck of the woods. Always perk up when I see folks in Washington State doing things. Thought it would be great to have her on the program just to hear more about what inspired the project, what the response has been, what this reveals about the system of racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. In addition to this product, she is a conceptual artist and a writer. I've linked to some of her different reports that she has written on her website at Medium. You can check out some of it, quite a bit of it, dealing with racism, but definitely go to the site and check it out. Real privilege to have her as a guest on the program. Joining us live, our guest this evening, Miss Natasha Marin. Let's see. Miss Marin, you're with us?
I'm here.
Outstanding.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Again, thank you. My apologies for the incorrect number. Thank you for being patient and dialing in. For our listeners, I'm sure this is some folks, this is their first time hearing about you and the work that you do. So anything that you think would be important for listeners to know about you before we get started?
Sure. I started, never mind. I can't say that. It has a bad word in it. I was going to say I started identifying as a different kind of black this year. I can allude to the words. If you saw the Dave Chappelle skit imitating Rick James, the one involving the couch, I'm identifying as deep Yo-Couch black this year. So that's kind of the first thing people need to know. The second thing is, nobody knows what a conceptual artist is. Like, nobody, except for maybe other conceptual artists. The way to sort of wrap your mind around that is that the journey is more important than the destination in conceptual art. So the concept, the ideation, the notion, and the process of getting there has more import and impact than like an end product. But I don't make, paintings. I mean, I do paint, but with these projects like Reparations, which is a social experiment, which started as a Facebook event and continues today, I like to engage people. People are kind of my medium, So a painter would use paint. I kind of paint with people. I like to see what people are going to do. That allows for many variables that are unknown, right? So when I started the project, I had an idea of how it would go, and as you've explained, I imagined people of color, non-white people making requests, and white-identified people making offerings. But what happened immediately, like day one, moment one of this project, was the first people who made offerings were people of color. And I think that's because it's just easier for everyone to make an offering than to make a request. And I usually tell people, like, if you've ever tried to sell Girl Scout cookies, or if you work in development or do any kind of fundraising, then you know it is really difficult to ask anyone, regardless of what color or ethnicity or background you come from. It's difficult to ask people to help you, especially in this day and age where trust is wearing so thin. So I was really pleasantly surprised to see that people of color kind of led the way, demonstrating kind of what generosity looks like. And many people who identify as white are also participating in the project. And I do ask white-identified allies and co-conspirators not to make requests, because there are many other outlets for that sort of thing. And we artists like to think of ourselves as a little bit innovative, trying new and different things. And so I'd say a couple hundred people have probably had their requests satisfied at this point. It's interesting to see the stories that come back my way, because this is kind of an outcome-indifferent project. I facilitate the connections, but I can't know what happens after people connect, like in every circumstance, So many people are participating. So that's kind of what I'd say, is just to set folks up. I've lived in Seattle since 2008, and I'm from the Caribbean, and I'm also from Canada. I have 3 citizenships, including American, which really perplexed the trolls, because they immediately wanted to deport me, of course, because the word reparations is a trigger word for white supremacists.
Fascinating. I want to kind of rewind to the beginning of your response, your classification for this year and its relationship to Dave Chappelle's skit. Like, can you break down exactly what that means? Whatever your couch black for 2016, yes. What does that mean?
Blank Your Couch Black is sort of a new unapologetic layer of black identity for me, because I am Caribbean. So I can, of course, claim mixed heritage. And in the Pacific Northwest, claiming and calibrating how mixed you are is very in vogue, but in the Caribbean it's very passé, because the history of the Caribbean is one in which no one got out without being mixed with something. So it's actually not interesting to talk about how mixed you are in the Caribbean, because it's a given. So coming to the United States, where people are very enamored by, like, just how can I distance myself from blackness, even people of color, He'll be like, oh, well, actually, I'm Haitian, or, I'm African, or, my mom's white, or my dad's white, or I'm half Thai, or I'm 1/8 Cherokee. I don't go in for any of that nonsense. Like, I think it's actually internalized oppression. Because if the president is black and his mother is white, like, why are those rules not applying to everybody else? I'm so confused. I'm terribly confused about that. So, no, this year I'm just like, just so that everybody knows, I am renouncing I am leveraging my own privilege to include myself as part of the deepest, darkest, blackest part of Africa possible at all times. Because I think it's ridiculous that we've allowed ourselves to be brainwashed into thinking that everything black, everything African, down to Africanized bees, has to be the worst, most awful version of whatever it is you're talking about. Ridiculous.
That is racism, white supremacy, for sure. Okie doke. This program, we start with our definition, just try to see where folks are at in terms of a definition for racism, white supremacy. I use those two terms as synonyms, and I use the same definition for both terms. The definition I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think such a system exists? Do you think that definition is accurate?
Well, words are all how we use them, but I definitely think that in the United States there is sort of a colloquial understanding of the word racism that is a misunderstanding. And then there's, like, the Oxford English Dictionary definition, But in America, part of being American is not giving a rat's blank about Oxford English definitions of anything. We, lead the world in, neologisms and, let's just make up the word. I mean, we have a presidential candidate right now who says things like bigly and unproud. So it's certainly not American to get your definitions right. But I think that they can be used interchangeably, the word racism and the term white supremacy. I think that white supremacy describes an almost ancient delusion of grandeur. So it's it's almost the way you might describe Jeffrey Dahmer as a psychopath or a sociopath. White supremacy is like a mental illness that's been passed down from generation to generation and normalized, and it's basically narcissism. It's a deadly form of narcissism. I think believing that you're different than other people and you're the one that's making the decision, who's valid and who's not. I don't know. I've been asking myself for years, what is it that makes white-identified people so insecure that they need to overcompensate to that extent, And I'm not sure I have a satisfying answer. But, yeah, I mean, I think your definitions are functional, and that's all that matters in terms of language, Usage determines so much of what language means,
I didn't really get an answer to my question. This one is kind of important because I do take the position that one of the ways with language with regards to racism is that frequently particularly terms like racism, will be used without a definition or people will use terms and definitions that are not accurate. I do take the position that, things can be proven to be true or false. So do you think the definition that I gave, do you think, based on your research, your observation, your experience, do you think that definition is accurate? A global system of people who classify themselves as white.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with your definition. I guess what I'm pointing out is a nuance.
And are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white.
Yeah, I'm just pointing out that, in the rules of language, somebody having, received institutional validation for having learned what people wanted to teach me about the English language. How you use a word is the most dominant factor in determining what that word means. So if I misuse the word racism and it becomes popular to misuse the word racism to describe, say, like bigotry or prejudice, that actually becomes a definition of the word because it's misused. So, like, as much as I want to say, like, yes, I agree with you 100%, I'm pointing out the nuance that people in the United States do not understand what the word racism means and constantly misuse it, which is basically creating a new definition for it. But yeah, I think white supremacy is more specific, for sure, and less likely to be misused.
Yeah, I totally understand and agree. That is a major, you said confusion earlier. I think that's one of the major things that happens in terms of generating confusion about exactly what racism is and how it works. I also think a big part of that is people having different definitions or no definition at all for the term racism, and I've seen where that generates a lot of confusion as well for folks. What are some of the works, specific people, books, or I guess even events that helped you conceptualize, framework your understanding of racism?
Well, I really like the book The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. That's a great book. Basically, what Painter is doing is she's revealing in a way that's concise and not terribly academic the way that whiteness has been shaped and created in the Western Hemisphere. So when I started this reparations project, I mean, trolls from hither to thither came out of the woodwork to call me a, half-breed monkey N-word that needs to hang myself and go back to Africa. And it got kind of boring, actually, unimaginative. But on the way, every now and then, somebody would say something like, well, what about me? Where my reparations, my grandfather was Italian. And I thought that was interesting because basically white-identified people are just that. They're identifying as white. Is there any actual whiteness to their white? I don't know. That's a totally different question, because what was white 75 years ago? There's a lot of white-identified folks that would not be passing the white test if we went back in time. They just wouldn't make it into the country club. So there's a lot of new white, like nouveau riche, but it's like nouveau blanche. So I think that's one of the most interesting things that I got from that book, The History of White People by Nell Painter. But there's a lot. Obviously, we're bombarded with information these days. You kind of have to, unplug, close your eyes, run away to not have information constantly coming your way.
Wow. Doctor, my apologies if you had more. Dr. Nell Irvin Painter, she's been a guest on our program. We discussed that very book, The History of White People. Interesting read indeed. I was going to ask some other questions about your project, but just since you are up here, Pacific Northwest, where I am, I've been telling listeners for a while now, pretty much every time that I see something in the Seattle Times about black people, it's bad. It's some sort of bad event or bad information. This trend has been going on for years. I wasn't born here, but I've been here for a few years now, and I've seen this trend for a while. There was a report. I just want to see if you saw these reports. There was a report in 2014. It was on the front page of the Seattle Times. As Seattle gets richer, the city's black households get poorer. It reads, it may feel like boom times in Seattle, but at least one group is being left out, the city's black residents. While Seattle's median household income soared to an all-time high, of $70,200 last year, wages for blacks nosedived to $25,700, a 13.5% drop from 2012. Among the 50 largest U.S. cities, Seattle now has the 9th lowest income for black households. And it goes on to give more of the particulars about how bad things are. That was one. And then they had one from this was like 2 weeks ago. This was really, it might have even been autumn, but it was basically saying that Seattle, in terms of business diversity, they have a lot of Asian businesses, but black people, not so much. And they just talk about how black people don't get the same types of loans. They are not treated like white people are when they go to the bank, and that's why it's really, really bad for black business owners here. Have you seen either of those two reports, or have you seen that same trend in the Seattle Times?
You know, I haven't seen those specific articles, but, you know, they could be like racism is still racist. It's still racism everywhere. I mean, like, what is that headline even? You know, who is supposed to receive what emotions from that? Are black identified people supposed to feel worse about the state of things, or is it like not news? Who is this news to? That's what I'm interested in. Who's the intended reader? Because I'm guessing that the Seattle Times is not writing to a black audience, because this is Seattle.
There are not that many of us here, so that seems very unlikely.
Those of us who are here are like utterly unsurprised by the fact that, wow, so black people still can't get small business loans and still are treated differently. Yeah, you know, no kidding, obviously. Racism is still very much alive and well in the United States and certainly in Seattle, despite all of the well-meaning white liberals who believe themselves to be incredibly progressive and yet are just as problematic as everyone else. Sorry if I sound a little bitter, but I feel like I've earned it.
Again, our guest. Right on. Our guest, Natasha Marin. With the reparations site specifically, it's linked in the program reparations.me. With the site specifically, I was even going to encourage listeners, you should go and make a request of some sort for something constructive and see what happens, and you can report back whether you got it or not, or if somebody contacted you or what have you. Reparations.me. So with the site, it started, you already explained, as an experiment on Facebook, got lots more attention than maybe you initially expected. So then you created the website, and it's got people from all over the world, not just Washington State, who are submitting and getting in contact with you and what have you. You said in one report that you were surprised, maybe even a bit naive, I think was the word you used, about the amount of backlash that you and even some of the users have received. Can you talk about that? Yeah,
I mean, if you had told me there are people in the world who have the kind of time where they will harass a veteran with PTSD that needs a new service dog, and they will harass him by making fake donations to his GoFundMe to make it seem like he's reached his goal. Do this viciously over and over, like 3 times, you know, I wouldn't have believed you, because I'd be like, who are these people? Because usually the gun-toting white supremacists are actually pretty down with supporting veterans, you know, and they're also known to be dog lovers. So I don't understand, like, who is this new demographic of people that they don't just hate black people. They don't just hate the idea or the word reparations. They hate veterans. They hate service dogs. Like, I don't understand that. And, yeah, it really blew my mind, the amount of time and energy people have invested trolling this project. I mean, have you ever sat down to, like, edit video before? It's pretty time intensive. You know, they say, like, 1 hour of editing equals 1 minute of video. There are several, like, 10 and 12-minute troll videos.
Wow.
Where people have just, like, sat down to, like, go through the site and just troll it and make a video about it and share it. And, you know, honestly, I'm kind of grateful to the trolls, because if it weren't for that backlash of hate, I would have been able to raise over $11,000 to help satisfy people's requests, you know? troll slaying is really popular. People want to sign up to be troll players, and like it's just a PayPal donate click away from being done. Like that's you can have the idea and on your phone actualize that intention in that same sort of motion. It's very easy to do. Same thing with making an offering or a request. I would say that folks that are now kind of getting on my nerves, and I probably shouldn't even say this, but I'm just saying what comes to mind today. The folks that get on my nerves are the people who are like, I need to pay off my student loans. Well, yeah, okay, like I also need to pay off my student loans. But how do you think me, an individual person, is going to single-handedly somehow wave my magic wand and eliminate your student loans? Like, read an article about this project. Listen to a radio show. Listen to a podcast. Like skim. You don't even have to go that deep. Or better yet, see what kind of things have been satisfied. If you're looking for any kind of resume review, tutoring, mentorship, it's in the bag. And if you know how important that is, if you want to be a dental assistant and you don't know anybody in the dental industry and you recognize that is how you get a job and that is how you make connections, and you make a request for like networking assistance or resume review, you will have your request satisfied. But if you're like, I want $9 million in a sparkly pony, well, it's not going to happen. So I'm at the point now where I'm like, oh my God, that's so aggravating when people are like, I just like to get out of student loan debt. Yes, we would all like to get out of student loan debt. Student loan debt is part of being an American. You know what I mean? It should be unpatriotic to not want your own student loan debt. It's the most American thing you can do, being in debt. So that's my little accidental riff today about the annoyance of people wanting me to help them with their student loan debt.
Wow.
Like, after me, maybe. Like, get in line. But
after her.
Kind of reasonable requests. Like, people have gotten engagement rings. People have had jobs. People have gotten used cars, groceries, winter clothing, back-to-school clothing, all kinds of self-care, art supplies. So it really helps if you have a specific idea in mind. Like, what is it that could bring some value to my life? This is not going to solve all of my problems, but maybe I can't afford to go to the bookstore and buy some new books. Maybe that's not in my budget, but maybe if I did that, I would feel more like a human being. I would feel better about my life and my week, and I'd have these books that I could escape into when my boss is, microaggressing me into the ground. That's just that's kind of strategic thinking. So I think the people who are having a really successful experience in terms of making requests are thinking about what specifically can I ask for? What is something that a stranger, someone who doesn't know me, could identify and connect with? There was a woman in San Francisco. She needed a new vacuum cleaner. She's like, I have a 5-year-old. 5-year-olds leave a trail of crap behind them everywhere they go. My sister was supposed to give me her vacuum cleaner. Then she ended up needing it. If you can get me a vacuum cleaner, I'd be so grateful. The next day she got a brand new vacuum cleaner. You know what I mean? It's not going to fix all of her life's problems, but in the immediate sense, it's one less thing she has to work on or think about.
For our listeners, you can kind of think of this as maybe a compensatory investment request in the language of Mr. Nelia Fuller Jr. In the response that you just shared, though, I want to go back because I thought that was so powerful, what you shared at the beginning about the veteran requesting a service dog, a veteran with PTSD, make sure we clarify, who was requesting a service dog, and the just really heinous racism that he experienced for all of the nonsense and rhetoric that we've heard for about a month and a half about anyone who doesn't pledge allegiance to the flag, that you're disrespecting veterans and soldiers who fought to protect this country. I can think of nothing more despicable than taunting, like flagrantly taunting a veteran who's a service dog, and you're just going to go and make fake donations.
But that's the ilk. That's what people needed to realize. That's what I thought was one of the best side things that came out of this project is I had almost synonymously, I put up a Facebook event page called Shrine of Ass Hats, and I hope that's okay to say on your show.
Yes.
And it was really just screen grabs of some of these troll comments that came in to people participating in the project and to me directly. And, you know, I couldn't repeat them because they're that odious and that disgusting. You know, people referred to my quote-unquote wild animal children. They were like, hey, you want something? You need something? I got something for you. Got some rope right here. You know, and there's a tree I can hang you on in the backyard. Like, I am a mother. I have small children. I do not think it's funny when I receive death threats because I'm doing basically a social media experiment that takes a gift economy into sort of a racialized context. You know, that's not as radical as one would think that Backlash would. I mean, I don't know. If I'm evil, what is evil? You know, if that's what you're focusing your hatred against, what the heck? You know, it's so confusing to me that people would just respond to just this word reparations, having read nothing about what I'm doing, and just get so angry at just that word being incanted that you want to threaten me and my children's lives? That's crazy.
that is racism, white supremacy. I mean, wow. Nothing else can be said there. Other than that, I wish I had said it the way I was thinking in my mind, that's terrorism, in my view, that totally is.
It is terrorism. It is terrorism.
It's terrorism, what you experienced and what some of the other users experienced. But I also think it's equally important. This, for sure, one of the other things, at least for me, that I thought was really important about that, and because I hear this so consistently, this is the pattern. This is not like an isolated response. I hear this consistently and across generations of black people who study racism, who think about this problem and, you know, are trying to get this problem solved. We've been dealing with this for a long time. They will invariably at some point say, particularly if they're experienced, like they've been doing this for a while, they will say at some point that they underestimated the pathology of racism, white supremacy, or they underestimated white people's commitment, their dedication, their investment in practicing racism. But something to that effect will be said consistently, and I think that's very important. At least to me, that suggests like maybe a widespread underestimation of racism, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, people think racism is in the past, or they think it's in the present as prejudice or bigotry, which gets some sort of a pass, like, you know, Trump and Canty, quote unquote locker room talk. Like it's something that's given this, it's just bigotry. But people call it racism because they don't understand that racism is a power dynamic, and that, you know, it would be very difficult for me as an individual person to enact racism on another person. It's not impossible, but it's challenging, you know? And then things like internalized oppression never get discussed. And that's bizarre to me. But I think in some ways, the fact that when this project launched, people of color were the first people to make offerings and opted to make offerings rather than requests, maybe saying something about not just human nature, but also internalized oppression as well. Because you don't want people to think that you're asking anything, because that makes you a bad person, right? You know, all the white supremacists wanted to talk about Gibbs, you know, Gibbs me this, Gibbs me that. But, you know, I find it interesting that ancestrally people could invest lifetimes in the infrastructure of this country and be actually the first capital of this capitalist nation and then be accused of being lazy. Like, that blows my mind. It blows my mind. It just, I don't understand, like, at what point can we test this out with white identified people? You know? People think of, like, reparations would make things equal again, and I'm talking about reparations for American slavery, not my project reparations, but how would that even work? You know, there is no check, there is no amount, and I'm not saying this should stop it from happening, but I mean, the controversy around reparations is around the fact that there is no dollar amount. that can make up for things like, let me just go and get all the kids and put them in boarding school and basically brainwash them and, quote-unquote, try to kill the Indian and save the man, right? That's crazy. What would that even look like if people of color tried that with white-identified people, right? I mean, or even just like the whole, let me roll up into your living room, put my feet on your coffee table, and declare your entire house mine. It's just a lack of etiquette, like basic etiquette. And then this projecting, like I said, it's a mental illness. This projecting that pivots around white supremacy, where it's like all of the insecurity of the white-identified person is projected out onto the person of color. Like, how is it that white people claim civility, but their history is so barbaric? How is that? I don't know. I have lots of questions, but my first thing is, like, I really do think people should ask themselves what they are doing when they incant their whiteness. When they say, I'm white, or as a white woman, or as a white man, what are they doing in that moment? What is the purpose of what they're doing? Because if your grandfather really is Italian, if your grandma's really Irish, if you understand because you're Jewish, let me see that. Let me see you identify that way. Let me see you come closer to this super dark blackness, Africanness that everyone is trying to run away from. Like, voluntarily put yourself closer to that fire. I want to see people do that. I want to see people leverage their privilege and kinesthetically practice that so that they don't have to actually theoretically understand privilege. They can just enact leveraging their privilege. That's what I want to do. Because I'm tired of trying to explain to people why. You know, I think Toni Morrison said it best. This is paraphrasing her hugely, but she basically said there's nothing wrong with leaving Becky stupid. You just leave Becky stupid. She can stay stupid, and you can keep your energy.
That is interesting. And it's written on the site for people. If you go to the Facebook page or if you go to the reparations.me page, you'll see as it's written in terms of the request, how you make a request, or how you, if you have something to offer, how you can do that on the page. It's got all the rules and everything written out, and I think you've used the phrasing on the program a few times today already. Why is it the phrase for people who identify as white? Why do you say it that way specifically?
Because I really truly think whiteness is a belief. I think it's a construct, and the only purpose the construct serves is oppression. It has no other purpose. Saying you're white has no other purpose. And I encourage people, if you think of what it does other than oppress other people, please email me. Tell me. Like, in this case, I'm inviting people to troll me. Like, troll me and tell me. Make your case. Because I don't see it happening. I don't see a purpose. We have decoded the human genome. We understand that all people come from Africa. All people come from Africa. So when people talk about indigeneity, happy Indigenous Peoples Day, they're talking about, like, happy absolutely African Day. You know, like, absolutely African. People are from Africa. And let's think about that for a second. Let's meditate on that. Let's celebrate our brothers and sisters all over the world, because all over the world there were original people. All over the world. And none of those original people were white. Like, not a single one of them. So I think white-identified people are feeling pretty lonely because they're beginning to realize, wow, we're an actual minority in the actual world, you know? And having calcified melanin is in no way better than having decalcified melanin. If the sun isn't your friend, how do you feel superior to me? Because me and the sun, we are super tight. I don't even need sunscreen. I can just, like, head out with some cocoa butter and high-five the sun. I don't understand where this delusion comes from, but I'm really excited about people exploring on their own what happens if they let go of this connection to white supremacy. What happens if you unclench your knuckles and you just, like, begin to let go of it and identify as my cousin? Why don't you start doing that? Like, start identifying as my cousin. I identify as a non-binary unicorn who's also Natasha's cousin. That's acceptable. You don't have to be white, you know? And then as you do that, realize that, yes, you have light-skinned privilege, which is something colorism goes all over the world. That's not just an American problem. And you can leverage your privilege as a light-skinned individual. But there are light-skinned individuals in every culture, and they're not necessarily calling themselves white.
Wow. You kind of answered two of my questions altogether. Always, that is grand when that happens. And I agree, like, 8,000% in terms of the only reason for claiming membership in the global white minority is to practice racism. It serves no other purpose other than to oppress all the people that you say are not a part of the white gang. That is the total essence. I'm in the same go-up. If you can figure out any other purpose for that identification, let me know. That would be, earth-shattering information. With that being our common understanding, you just in one of your interviews, you were saying that the site reparations.me, the site lets you cash in your whiteness to help other people. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, I want to say, was that the LA Times? That might have been the LA Times.
I believe so. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I kind of want to preface this by saying that I've learned something about media and how journalism works while doing this project. Modern day Western journalism pivots on the moment of polarity. So what really happened could be two women met at a cafe, exchanged cards. The headline will be like, oh, no, she didn't. You know what I'm saying? Like, this woman hates this woman for such and such a reason. And I'm not sure if this is a good thing or a bad thing, because I realize that we are not interested in nuance as a country anymore. And that's kind of sad. So everything is very, like, bombastically overblown. And I'm prefacing this comment because I think that is, like, oversimplifying the project, right? Like, I don't think that there is such a thing as cashing in your whiteness, per se. But I do think that privilege is intersectional and can be leveraged. So just like I have had the privilege to be able-bodied, to give birth to viable children, to be educated, other people may not necessarily have those same privileges. And recognizing that for me is a process that involves, like, okay, how can I help? How can I help and how can I add value to people in my community who don't have the privileges that I have? And that's really all I'm asking white identified people to do. Whether they participate in my project or not is kind of neither here nor there, but I think the process of sitting down and asking yourself, how can I add value to my community, is a really important question, because this project was born out of frustration and sadness. This was born out of me having an incredibly engaged network, and that network having many white identified people in it, all of whom were feeling powerless. And how depressing is that, right? I am a black woman and a mother, and I could do this, like, with my two hands, I could start this project. How dare you, as a white identified person, feel powerless? How dare you? How dare you feel powerless? You most certainly have the power to do something, Like, a black man could be pulled over, surrounded by cops, and a white woman could just walk up, like, acting like she doesn't even know what's going on, and be like, officer, can you tell me how to get to Starbucks? And, like, save someone's life straight up, just by inserting her white femininity in the middle of what is about to be hella violent and asking a question that's completely unrelated. That is power. And I'm going to need people with that kind of power to recognize that they have it, because anything else to me just seems irresponsible.
It was fascinating because you were using the word privilege kind of at the beginning of your response, and then you switched to the word power at the end, which I thought was fascinating. Do you think privilege is the most accurate term if we're saying white privilege? Do you think that's the most accurate term to convey what you are speaking about if white people?
Well, it would be funny if we were talking about white power. I mean, that would be a different kind of conversation, right? Like, can you
different
talk about
how?
white power?
Different how?
People can do. Well, I mean, when I hear the term white power, I do go, like, straight to, like, what was it, the Tyrone Bigham sketch with the, like, black white supremacists? White power. Like, I don't think the term white power can be used in common parlance without, like, invoking, like, the KKK, right? So I think that's why the term white privilege exists. Because we can't talk about white power without sort of, like, going straight to, like, people hanging from trees. And sometimes you want, like, some middle ground, you know? Because I think many Americans believe racism is that, like, hanging a person from a tree. Like, that's how you know you're a racist. And that's it. And there's nothing else. And then they kind of have this vague notion of microaggression, which is like, I shouldn't ask the Asian girl at work where she's from, kind of thing. Like, but most of the time there's like a lot of cluelessness in between that. And I think that all these terms that are coming up, like white privilege, white guilt, white fragility, I think these are all terms trying to describe, you know, white supremacy. But white supremacy and ideas like white power are so overblown that, like, synaptically people cannot handle. They can't handle it. So we fill in our language with baby steps. We're trying to get there somehow. But yes, of course, privilege is power. I mean, of course it is. But I think if you and I were really sitting here talking about white power and somebody tuned in, they'd be like, what is happening right now? Because how often do you even hear that? Like, when is the last time you heard somebody say white power?
I say it pretty frequently. I don't think I've said it on today's program, but I use it in my writing.
Every day. For jobs, I say white power a couple times. Yeah, it's hilarious.
I do use it pretty often. It's generally not, there's generally no laughing when I switch and use the term white power. But at least in my view, my thought process is a little different around the word white privilege because my position, and particularly having talked to a lot of whites, many of them here in Washington State and even whites around the world, I think that one of the ways that white supremacy is practiced and maintained is deliberately using inaccurate terms or using terms with no definition. We talked about that before, or using incorrect terms. All of that generates confusion. And I think that term white privilege, like I've never heard anyone talk about what happened to Jews in Nazi Germany and say that was just a little white privilege run amok. Like I've never heard that. They use
that's true. That's very true. But that's also because there is such gray area now. Like, I have been asking my Jewish friends, like, seriously, I'm going to be the person now that asks the ignorant question, do you identify as white? Like, I have to ask. And the responses have been varied, like extremely varied. Like the way when two black people have a child, they have no idea which shade it's going to be. That's how varied the responses are when I ask my Jewish friends, do you identify as white or not? Because some people do and some people don't. You know, there's some flexibility there that I don't think darker skinned people are allowed the privilege of having that opt-in or out thing. You know.
Even I want to get back to my privilege thing really quick, but just my quick comment on that would just be quote unquote Jew or Jewish. That is not a racial classification. You can look on the census to see this as well. But just with the white privilege thing, as I said, like I'd never hear anyone refer to what Adolf Hitler did as just a little extreme white privilege. And conversely, I don't think what Dylan Storm Roof did, I don't think that is white privilege. I don't think that's the most accurate term to describe that. And I think racist, in fact, the other example I would use, we've had so many whites on this program over a number of years, they can give lists that last for days about the different types of privilege they have, like that they aren't followed around the store and the police don't harass and tase them, and they have Band-Aids that match their skin. I mean, they can just go on and on and on and on and on. Okay. Can you name some ways that you actually practice racism? Insert crickets. Like, over 90% of the whites that I talk, they cannot think of one, and these are white people that are not like 10 or 15. These are whites that are over 30, over 40, over 50, and they can't think of one time in their existence where they practiced racism. And I think that using terms like white privilege, these are very passive ways of thinking about something that is direct, targeted activity worldwide forever, and in my view, irredeemably so, that whites have just demonstrated that they are totally unwilling to breach with the practice of terrorizing black people, and that they're going to do this in all areas of people activity. In fact, I even think it would be best, because that's basically what that, when you take that classification, I'm identifying as a white person, that's what you're signing up for. Maybe I don't go out with the Klan outfit and a rope, but there's a reason that black people can't get loans in Seattle. That's white power. There's a reason.
Or anywhere else, honestly.
Exactly.
Really, yeah.
Exactly.
I mean,
that's what I mean. It's just not accurate with the word privilege. It's just,
didn't
really.
It blow your mind? Didn't it blow your mind when you heard that story about the school in, I think it was South Africa, where the girls were being told not to wear their natural hair? And it's like, okay, so we're in Africa now with African girls at an African school, and everybody there is African identified, like, you know. And within this is the internalized oppression of, you know, the colonizer's hand up your puppet butt. Just like,
well, there were still some white people at that school, as I understand it, at least. It wasn't that all of the administration there was black. I saw some white people in the photograph.
Yeah, but I mean, I think your point about
it looked like there were some white people who were directly responsible, who lived there. I don't know if they're Afrikaners or whatever, but.
I think your point about Jewishness not necessarily relating to race is interesting, because of course there is no such thing as race scientifically. Like, there is a human race. There is more genetic variance within what we refer to as races than across and between them. We've already figured all of this out. But just like in the United States right now, there's a lot of rhetoric about this Muslim identity that's often paired with, very problematically so, the idea of the terrorist. You pointing out, yeah, well, Judaism isn't really a race. I don't know. I mean, like, I think there's people who would argue it is, because it's sort of like culturally based. But whether it is or it isn't doesn't really matter. It's kind of like how we began this conversation talking about racism and white supremacy and these definitions. And I said, like, how people use these things has a lot of determination in what they mean. Like, meaning is fluid. It's not static, right? These definitions aren't static. It's how we use them, how we invoke them. So I think if there is this idea of this monolithic Muslim identity right now, which is ridiculous, because, like, no one would ever assume that a Christian looked like one thing. We know Christianity's been all over the world, right? But we are quick to say, like, there is this, like, racial identity known as Jewish. There is this racial identity known as Islamic, which isn't necessarily true at all, right? Because you could be any shade of the rainbow, any nationality of the rainbow, and be Jewish or be Muslim or be Christian, right? But then it's just like that basic American stupidity. And I'm sorry, but, like, I am not from here. Like, I am American now, but in other countries, people just, like, kind of have some sense. Like, they kind of know that there's a whole world out there. And America is, like, the seat of narcissism. And white supremacy is rampant here because of that narcissism that's already an American narcissism. Why is it that Americans have to be so loud? Why is it they have to talk all the time? Why is it that they're a propaganda freaking machine? Why is it that we're even talking about America being great when other people are busy doing it? Wasn't there one of those northern European countries recently that just had so much money they just handed it out to everybody? They're like, we have so much money, all. We're just going to, if you live here, just come. We'll just give you a check. Like, it's not even reparations, right? They're emptying and closing their prisons because they're rehabilitating people. Cuba is always putting people to shame by sending out the doctors first. There's kids in Bangladesh whose math and science scores are, like, trumping all of us here in the United States. And it's just pathetic. And it's going to continue to be pathetic until people realize, wow, white supremacy isn't doing us any favors. Like, it's really not. Our kids aren't smarter. People are not healthier. People are not happier. You know? What is all of this for? In the end, how is this ever going to be sustainable?
What is all this for? Good question. I did want to ask about, I think this is your pal. You can correct me. Reagan Jackson. She's a journalist.
She
she
is
also.
So awesome. Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. She wrote a piece calling out white media. Actually, she wrote a piece about your reparations.me site and project, and then she wrote a follow-up piece that was talking about how the white press covered your site. And I just want to read a quick paragraph to get your thoughts on her follow-up piece. So she writes, but part of me was furious at the way white media took this really interesting project and smushed it into racialized clickbait. It's like journalists read the word reparations, then didn't bother to read the rest of the project description. They took a project that centralized the needs of people of color and doing the work to create a bridge through this collective racial trauma towards some sort of healing, and spun it into a story about black people begging for charity. Not only did I feel marginalized as a journalist, as my story got shunted aside in favor of the inaccurate, mediocre, whitewashed retelling, but then I got to watch the white media marginalize black art and a black artist again. What is the point of mainstream media providing coverage of non-white issues if they aren't going to take the time to get it right? That is from Reagan Jackson. What did you think of her piece and her assessment? Is she correct?
Well, Reagan's really lovely, and she's collecting her Globee Award this Friday because I'm not the only one who thinks that. Like, she is a thoughtful person, the kind of person who doesn't just stop and get you like a smelly soap for your birthday. Well, think about it for months. Like, what kind of gift matches this kind of person? And that kind of conscientious attention to detail is what used to be standard in journalism, and is definitely gone. Gone. It's gone. And in many ways, she's 100% right. Because, like I said, so many of these headlines are just polarizing for the sake of being polarizing, just getting people upset. And the word reparations already invokes so much response from people I did not know, because silly me, I went to graduate school for English literature, and I know what the word reparations means, and I'm using it correctly. But then again, I'm in this country with people who are, killing themselves, not happy, uneducated, and they're, proud of it. You know what I mean? So what am I supposed to do with that?
Bernie Sanders tried to tell you, man. He told you that reparations was too divisive. He tried to tell you.
But I think it's just enough. I actually think that having these discussions is worth it. No matter how tired and frustrated I get by so many things, I think that humans wanting to connect and engage is something that I am here for.
Right on. I hope people will engage. Listeners, go to the site reparations.me. I said if you go ahead and make a request, we can see what happens. You can call in and update if your request is met or whatever happens. If you get trolled, let us know that too. That would be interesting. We had a few folks that dialed in who had questions. Did you want to take a call or two?
Yes.
Grand. Thomas in New York, did you have a question for Ms. Marin? You should be with us.
Good evening, Gus. Can I be heard?
Hi, I can hardly hear you.
Good evening. Can you hear me better
Thomas
now?
in New York, are you with us, sir?
Yes.
Oh, yes, sir.
Yes.
Good. Great. Man, I was looking forward to this show, and then the guest started speaking about her project, and I'm a little confused. Did you say you were in a relationship with a white man?
No, I don't think we talked about my relationship status at all.
Okay. No, when I chimed in, I heard a cowbell. That's why. Have you ever received any reparations yourself?
So you don't mean government reparations. You mean
no? I mean from your website.
No, I my friends have been like, Natasha, you poor thing. Here you are doing all of this, and people have no idea what your circumstances are. You should ask for something. And I'm like, no, I feel like that would be a conflict of interest. So I'm still at the point where I haven't actually made any requests, but the universe has been very kind to me, and people have stepped up almost with psychic knowledge to know, when I need some help, if I need, a massage or sending me like dinner so I don't have to, cook. It's been great. But again, those are oftentimes people of color stepping up to do what's needed.
Okay. Now, you said you're Caribbean and Canadian, am I right?
I have 3 citizenships. So I was born in Trinidad and naturalized first in Canada, and then when did Barack Obama first run? The year before he was elected, I became American.
Okay. And you think that you deserve U.S. reparations via massages and things, even though you were not a descendant of Americans who...
I am American, but I'm going to have to stop you and be like, once again, this is how it is so easy for me to go off on just like the general dirt of America. It is not that hard to figure out what I'm doing with this project. At no point on the entire website will you see the term American slavery. I am not dealing with reparations for American slavery at all. Not even a little bit. You know why? Because there are people who have been on that for generations, like since the end of slavery. And they're way better qualified at like potentially changing policy than I am. So do I think I deserve people in my community leveraging their privilege to help me or anybody else like me out? Hell yes. That's what this project is about. It's not a question of deserving. The deserving is already there. It's clearly there. People are feeling brokenhearted. They're feeling like they don't even feel the humanity of the people around them, because we are living at a time where you could get killed for having expired tags, and you're supposed to go into work and act like it's no biggie the next day. And I mean, we've seen there have been psychological and scientific studies that show that trauma is carried down from generation to generation. And I mean, I'm thinking about the trauma our generation is going through right now.
Yeah, I listened to your student loans comment, and I thought it was something that a white person would say. And I don't see nothing wrong with a black person requesting to have their student loans paid for after what we've been through. And you made it seem like, to get a racket. That's not payback to me for slavery, Jim Crow, Black Holes, Red White, Ferguson, Baltimore, everything else that's happened. So I just don't get the point of this this whole reparation site that you have.
That's
I'll read my line.
I think you may have misunderstood sarcasm. Like it is like a fine art in the Pacific Northwest. I was being sarcastic when I said like it would almost be unpatriotic to not want to be in debt. Being in debt is like being American. I mean, it is true, but I was being sarcastic at the time. Obviously, people want their student loan debt forgiven. Would you know it that in other countries they actually forgive your student loan debt? Like it actually happens. America, quote unquote, greatest country on earth, la la la, propaganda, yada yada yada, not a thing here. But if that makes me sound like a quote unquote white person, like I guarantee you are not the first person who has thought that they were insulting me by saying that I sound white. Like, hello, internalized oppression. Like, check yourself before you wreck yourself.
The person that dialed in 6133, did you have a question for Natasha Marin?
Hi, good evening, Gus, to the guests and to the listeners. Ms. Marin, well, I want to make a first quick statement that I've never seen a white person before, so I think the people who classify themselves as white are talking about something other than their physical characteristics. But my question is, based on your project and what you know about the history of white people, do you think white people are genetically predisposed to their psychopathic and organized criminal racist behavior towards people they classify as not white?
I just like that question. I just want to celebrate your question. I'm glad that sometimes in my life somebody asks me if what identifies people were predisposed to being psychopathic. It's a question I've asked myself. I've asked that question. But here's the thing, like you said at the beginning, I'm not sure I believe in this whiteness thing to begin with, because I've been all over the world. I've been to Iceland, I've been to Finland, I've been to awesome people everywhere. And the thing about that is there are people who need to be white, and then there are people who don't. And the people who don't need to be white all the time, many of them are, pretty light, bright, and damn near white. Like, they are pale-looking people. But I don't think being lighter-skinned and being white are necessarily the same thing. I think identifying as white is automatically an act of violence. And I think a lot of people are they're just blissfully ignorant to that fact because they don't have to know what that violence is. So I don't know if there's a predisposition. I think that, that kind of ideology, that there's any kind of, predisposition to anything is problematic, right? Because according to all the trolls that I've met, black people are predisposed to being lazy monkey N-words that need to go back to Africa before they kill themselves. I've heard a lot of that, right? They always want something for free, lazy, da-da-da-da. So I don't think it's a good idea for people to be predisposed to anything. That kind of ideology worries me, right? But I do think identifying as white is an act of oppression. I do think so. I think that there are ways to exist in the world and feel connected to other people and to feel connected to yourself and your own ancestry that is healthy and positive and generative. And I wish I could see more of that. And what I'm doing with this project is really trying to get people to practice thinking about themselves as community and to practice thinking about themselves as being empowered, people of all shades and backgrounds. What is it that I bring to the table? Have you asked yourself in the apocalypse, who would you be in the apocalypse? What would you be doing? How would you be helping? Can you build a house? Can you fix a car? Can you cook a meal? Can you watch a kid? What can you do to add value to your community?
Hello?
Are you there? Yeah?
Yeah. I have one last question. In your opinion, why do you think white people would leave Africa with all the fruits, vegetables, fish, foliage, abundance of food to go live in cold caves eating raw meat? What would be the reason why they would leave Africa to go suffer in a cold, inhospitable environment?
Well, I think that when we're talking about the original people being from Africa, and then we're talking about this really relatively new thing of identifying as white, those are really temporally disparate ideations, okay? So the knowledge, the truth, the fact that human people of our species came from the geographic region now known as Africa, that's one thing. Fast forward several thousand years, and we have people identifying as white. And this is brand new, actually. You go back a couple hundred years, there's nobody identifying as white. Greeks and Romans, they were not identifying as white. That's a huge masturbatory fantasy on the part of current-day white-identifying people. Because I went to Greece, and you know what I saw in the museums? I saw Mother Mary and Jesus with dreadlocks. Ancient dreadlocks, Mary and Jesus. Raise my hand to everything that is holy, and I swear it to you. But I would have to see that with my own eyes to know that this is, wow, they're just making stuff up, making it up. So the ancient Greeks and Romans were not identifying as white. Egypt is a part of Africa. There's a lot of messed up nonsense that is clouding our judgment. And I think when you're thinking about people who separated in the human tree, the human branch that began in Africa and spread it all over the world, there are many reasons. I mean, many of them would probably be environmental. People move usually based, just like animals. We are animals. We move based on resources and weather patterns and social harmony and or conflicts. I mean, it's just, it's basic anthropology, which is, of course, white supremacy as well. But what are you going to do? We'd have to build whole new systems. Everything would have to be new. Burn it all down and start over again.
Well, make a request for that on reparations.me. Roz, did you have a question for Ms. Marin? You should be with us, Roz.
Yes, greetings to you, Gus, and greetings to you, Mrs. Marin. It's great to talk to you this evening. I had two questions for you. The first one is I'm also of Trinidadian descent as well, and I wanted to get your take from your experiences, what you see the differences between racism in the United States versus how it's expressed in Canada and how it's expressed in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you for asking that question, because people don't realize, Roz, that there are different kinds of, like, racial hierarchies in different places, you know? American identity is one of, like, we're America, we're the only thing that matters, da-da-da-da, you know? But that, to the rest of the world, that looks really ignorant, because there is a lot more out there besides America and Americanness and American propaganda. So in Canada, one of the things that people don't often realize is that in the racial hierarchy, if I'm crossing the border to Canada and a First Nations person is crossing the border to Canada, guess which one of us is going to get more harassed at the border? It's not going to be me. So in other places, actually, there are people at different layers of the hierarchy experiencing different kinds of oppression. Like, I could easily leverage my privilege to a First Nations person in Canada. And that's why there's actually a lot of harmony between African-descended people and Indigenous people in Canada. Like, there's, like, a kind of a kinship there, because we're, like, equally sort of shat upon. And definitely First Nations people to a much larger extent. Like, you think about the backlash of the Flint, Michigan water situation. Like, there are communities of First Nations people all over that haven't had drinkable water, like, in generations. And nobody even cares. Like, it's not even being discussed. That's the extent of that dehumanization. And so I really feel like it's good for people to ask this question. It's good for people to know the answer. Trinidad is, I summarize it like, if it were a haiku, I would say it would be like a gang rape of colonization. You know, some places, think about India and Pakistan, right? That was just the British messing all that up. That was just one set of people. That was just one set of colonizers, right? Hong Kong, that's just the British. That's just one set of people messing your stuff up. Imagine a twin island nation with the French, the British, the Dutch. You know what I mean? Like, the way you survive that is by having more than one tactic in your quiver, right? It's not just assimilating. It's not just passing. It's not just being able to syncretize information and culture and adapt and, like, take it and play it like you would in, like, Go-to-Pack, right? You have to be nimble culturally and fluent culturally. And I think that Trinidadians are culturally more fluent than many other people in the world, because we've had to practice it for survival. And if you're Trinidadian, then you know when you walk out into the world, really anyone could be your cousin. Like, really and actually. Like, you could just pick a person from a bus stop, take them to a family reunion and be like, this is my cousin so-and-so. And no one's going to twitch their eye at that, because we've seen, and in our families we do have cousins that look like everyone. And in our family trees we have names that are all across cultural boundaries. That's how everyone is. In the United States, everything is very binary. It's kind of boring, actually. You know, it's like black, white, and then the other experience is not being black or white, right? It's like you hear a lot of, you know, critical mixed race theory being like, what happens to me because I'm not black and I'm not white? And that's like, this is American dialectic about race. But it's really not nuanced. It's definitely not as complicated as it is in other places. You know, shadism is a common factor, of course, everywhere. Between Canada, Trinidad, and the United States, definitely shadism, colorism is a thing.
Thank you for your answer. I find that interesting because it took me until I was 18 to learn that I had a cousin from Venezuela who babysat me for a number of years, and we found out by accident that she was actually our cousin. So it's very interesting you brought that up. My second question was, go ahead.
I met a first cousin at a conference like a month ago. She came up to me and she's like, "Is Marin really your last name?" She's like, "Because Marin's my last name and my people are from Trinidad." And within like 5 minutes, we'd figured out the common relative. And it was like, oh my God, we're really cousins. Not something you would be able to see visually, you know, because that's the human family. Here's the rub, right? We are all family. Despite all this nonsense, you think about the crazy dynamics in your personal, intimate family, your immediate family, the larger human family is exactly as dysfunctional because we are related. We are relatives. We are family. And we should definitely learn how to work together, pool our resources. And I think family is like the first thing that white supremacy attacks. The first thing it needs to take from us is that feeling of belonging in community.
Eloquently stated. And my second question is actually a two-part question. The first is, have you ever heard of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing?
What's the last name?
Welsing, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. She just passed away earlier this year, January 2nd, I believe.
I'm sorry, I haven't.
Okay, well, she's actually, I would say, one of the greatest black psychiatrists and African warrior scholars that we've ever had. She's just phenomenal. And in her book, she has a book called The ISIS Papers. And she calls it a theory in the book because it was written a while ago, but to me, it's no longer a theory. Essentially, she has posited that white people practice global racism, white supremacy, in order to prevent their genetic annihilation. And her premise is the fact that whenever a white person procreates with a non-white person, the result of that union would be a non-white child. And for all the people that she had discussed, had talked to white people she had talked to about this situation, all of them basically said that they did not want their offspring or their grandchildren or descendants to be non-white. They all wanted them to be white. So basically she posited that, which is accurate, that white people are essentially a pedigree race or an inbred race, and the only way for them to remain white is to perpetually practice racism, white supremacy. And I wanted to ask you, first, if you felt that was accurate, and also I would implore you to read that book. I think it'll change your life, and it'll help to solidify, because I know you said a couple of times earlier this evening that you were kind of confused by some of the things that you've seen and heard from white people, and I think reading her book will really help to bring home just how they function.
I've heard of the ISIS Papers, and your nudge is enough to get me to, sit down and read it. Of course, my reading backlog is, as a mother, I could strategically place the book in places and hope that, by the end of next year, I would have read it. But I certainly will make the effort, and I try to make an effort to do what I say I'm going to do, and I would like to read that book because this is a fascinating philosophy. It really is, because I have wondered to myself so many times, what is the gaping, cavernous abyss of insecurity that must be projected on everyone else? You start with therapy, basic psychology 101, and you can see that the ideation of whiteness is so problematic. It's so problematic. Who else had to tromp around the world, massacring people, raping and murdering people, chopping off their hands? I mean, that is insane. It's insanity. And, a white identified person will be quick to tell you, oh, it was the Africans that sold white people into slavery. Oh, my God, read a book. No. No, you're wrong, and you keep telling yourself these ridiculous bedtime stories. Why? But I think that's a great possibility. I think she was definitely onto something, and I wish more white-identified people would read that too and kind of sit with themselves and think, why do I need to hold on to this identity? What am I getting out of it? How am I more connected to the rest of the people on the planet by clutching onto this identity? And I will also point out that living in the Pacific Northwest, I have seen with my own eyes that genetically, whiteness is fairly strong here. I have seen white plus other equals white, to the point where it makes me wonder what it's going to be like in 50 years when there's all these seemingly white people walking around and their parents are totally non-white. What is that conversation going to be like? What is that going to be like? Because, of course, in places like the Caribbean, that's already existed for generations.
Female caller in Michigan. Did you have a question for Ms. Marin? Thanks, Roz. Female caller in Michigan.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Gus, and to the guest callers and listeners. I do have one question for the guest. And who do you feel or who do you think is most confused about racism, non-white people or white people, and why?
Definitely white people. People who identify as white don't have enough practice doing anything else but claiming superiority over others to know really the nuances of the experience of being non-white and therefore the experience of being oppressed based on your appearance or racial identity. So I would say that white-identified people are definitely the most confused. I think, though, that we're all confused because part of how people of color have survived to this moment throughout a history of oppression by white people all over the world is by adapting certain strategies for survival. And I think we get into some really sticky territory when we talk about those strategies for survival. Passing is a strategy for survival, right? But it comes up with some pretty complicated psychology, too, right? Because you kind of have to, like, turn away from yourself. I've heard a lot of people who vocally identify as mixed race talk about not feeling like they belong here or there. And I see sort of people of color metaphorically sell each other downriver all the time by acting out this white behavior, this white-identified oppressive behavior. So I think there is a lot of confusion that goes across the board. I think people in general are forgetting that we're people and that we really are all family, and that ultimately, if we were all to have to connect, like let's say the fabled, alien invasion comes, you're not really going to care what color the person is who gets you the water you need to give your child the water so that they can survive. You're really not. You know what I mean? If we have a common enemy, then we have a common enemy, and that will bring us together. But right now, divide and conquer is ruling the day, and it's ruling the day all across the board. Within sort of blackness, the giant vacuous chasm of blackness, within the giant vacuous chasm of whiteness, people are still trying to tear each other down and not bring each other up. And I don't know why that is. I mean, I think back to when I was young and I'd read Betty and Veronica comic books. Everyone knows that, like, within the realm of whiteness, there is an idealized whiteness as well, If you're a blonde white girl, you're prettier than, say, a brunette, right? This is all part of the white supremacist aesthetic doctrine, So even if you're white, you're still having to deal with white supremacy. And that can be, I can imagine, that would be very confusing. I think it's confusing for white people to realize that they are also suffering because of white supremacy.
Well, I just want to ask another question based off of your response. You said white people are, you said white people, they suffer from I'm sorry, I missed that last part. What were you saying?
We're all suffering because of white supremacy.
Okay, so I guess my question is, how are white people suffering from white supremacy?
I would say, I look at things like mass murders and terrorism, which I'm thinking of as white terrorism, white domestic terrorism, and what's happening. In many of these circumstances, you have males, white males, usually like 20 to 40, who do not feel connected to their communities. They feel like lone wolves. They feel isolated. I think white supremacy is very isolating because, yeah, you can say you're white, but that's saying you're different than everybody else. And that's going to be a lonely experience at some point. I've heard white-identified people complain, like, I don't feel like I have a culture. It's like, that's because you have a culture of oppression. Like if you were more down with your Irish roots or your Italian roots or whatever, you probably would not feel so lonely and isolated, So I do think that white supremacy is affecting all of us all the time. And the fact that white people think it's not affecting them is part of the problem. It becomes our problem as people of color. Like, we should fix it, even though racism and white supremacy were not our inventions.
Got it. All right. Thanks for taking my call. I'll mute my line.
Appreciate that. The caller at 7715. Did you have a question for Ms. Marin?
Oh, yes. Thank you for taking my call. I definitely appreciate the website. I was actually looking at it, and I understand that you said that you have encountered some people who have just been ridiculous. And actually, when I read the description of today's show, I figured that, of course, you would have some people out there saying, okay, well, I need $1 million, what have you. But is there, do you find that I feel like it's a little bit more, like you kind of hinted at it. It seems like it's a little bit more embarrassing. Like, even if I did need something, which I'm finding that I don't need something, and I actually want to offer people, if I did have something little, to offer them something, I almost find it embarrassing for people to really try to use that as a means to, I don't know, become wealthy or try to put themselves on an equal playing field. Do you find that there are more sensible people like myself, or do you find that there are more people who just seem like they just want to make basically a quick come up?
I think there's all kinds of different people, like of every kind in the world. I think there's more people that I've interacted, like you, who feel like it's just easier psychologically, emotionally, spiritually to make an offering. And for those of us who have discovered the life hack of being generous, it actually works, right? You know you can be having a terrible day. And if you decide for whatever reason you're going to hold that door open for that single mom with her 2 kids trying to get on the bus and, like, help her up, and she smiles at you and you can see that, like, you brought her relief, just by doing this little thing that didn't cost you anything but some time and energy, it actually makes you feel better, And in that way, I think it's extremely brave and very vulnerable for people to ask for what they need. But I think it's important, just as important, for people of color to feel like they can ask for what they need. When I go into the office and I'm sitting next to Becky and friends who, like, have fewer degrees than me, less experience than me, making more money than me, they never feel bad about it. They don't feel bad about it at all. They don't feel bad about it at all. And I don't know why it is that we are so compassionate and we are so sensitive. Maybe it's because we have a history of practicing that sensitivity and compassion to survive. I don't know. Because community is how human beings survive, of all colors. And you build community by being generous and by seeing that if you're hurting, I'm hurting. And when you're happy, I'm happy. So I would encourage you to, like, definitely make an offering if you would like to make an offering. But, maybe think about what it is. Like, is that internalized depression? Is that something? What is stopping you from saying, like, hey, actually, maybe I do need a ride to the airport, Maybe that would bring some relief and sense of calm to my life, No,
I don't think definitely understand. I did have just, I'm sorry, I had just one other quick question because I'm trying to make sure I don't forget it, because you've definitely opened my eyes to a lot of different things, and I appreciate it. And I really, I guess I kind of also felt bad for the first caller who seemed like he was definitely very ignorant to a lot of different things, just how he started off saying, well, you're probably with a white man or whatever, and I'm actually getting past that because I have noticed with some people, if they do want to better their race, they might not be with a person of the same race, and that still has nothing to do with, if you still want to help someone, what difference does it make who they're with? Just that it goes back to, like you were saying, we're all a human race, so what difference? It doesn't make a difference. But I've also heard people saying, well, we should just stop talking about racism, and I can't quite wrap my head around that, how that would actually stop the racism or stop the supremacy or stop the oppression.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is that you can be accused of being a racist as a person of color just by referring to a white-identified person as white, as a self-identified white person as white. So if you're in a meeting and you're like, well, Bob is white and Bob said such and such, you can become a racist, quote unquote, in that moment, right? And this goes back to us talking earlier about how people misuse that word racism and racist to mean bigotry and prejudice all the time. But yeah, I don't think it really matters who you're with. Like in the Caribbean, we're so over that whole like, wow, so you decided to marry and have children with somebody who doesn't look exactly like you. Like, yeah. And then the other caller who was talking about the ISIS papers and what about this notion of like sustaining whiteness as kind of like a generational inbreeding and a genetic insecurity. I think that's very interesting, like very plausible, because just discussing whiteness is something that's relatively controversial right now. And I think that's peculiar and bizarre, and we definitely should keep talking about these things. But more than talking, we should be doing stuff about it, you know?
No, I understand. Well, thank you so much for taking my call and answering the questions.
Appreciate that. Are you a first-time caller, ma'am?
No, I feel like I've called. It's been a little while back, but no, I've called before.
Right on. Good to hear from you. The next caller at 2899. I do, just for the integrity of the program, I have maintained for the entire time that we have been broadcasting, that one thing that non-white people could do that would work against racism, no sexual intercourse with whites, and I have maintained that is extremely important, but I don't have time to get into all that right now. The person at 2899, did you have a question for Ms. Marin?
Yeah, good evening, Gus. Good evening, Mrs. Marin, and good evening to the regular audience. I don't know if I have many questions. That lady that just got off the phone may not understand. I think that was Thomas, the first person to ask Ms. Marin the question, or at least I think he was stating what I'm about to say. And out of respect, I'm just trying to find the right way to let you know that in answering, I think myself, when these conversations come up, I become very alert, so I won't pretend to be the best listener. But when these conversations come up, I listen very clear. I would just have to say, Ms. Marin, my feeling is your answers may be too
long. Do you have a question, sir? I'm truly trying, because we have other callers, so I'm trying not to do a whole lot of speech and fine. Do you have a question?
No. I was more concerned I couldn't understand her answers. That's, I think, I can't get a question. That's the reason why. And I'll leave it alone.
Is there something I can clarify for you? I'm sorry. We've talked about a lot of different things. So,
well, ma'am, all I was saying was I understand, Gus, you got to keep us moving. So I'll just say this. I think your answers are too long is what it is, and I'll mute my line.
Well, everyone is entitled to their opinion, right? Opinions are cheap. Hopefully that was succinct enough for you.
The caller at 5808, did you have a question for Ms. Marin?
I do. Thank you for taking my call. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And hi, Gus. I haven't called in a long time, but I love you.
Grand to hear from you.
Cool. Okay, yes. My question is, have you successfully been able to get white people to leverage their whiteness to help you? Like, do you? Yeah, that's what I'll ask.
Well, an earlier caller asked if I had participated myself in this reparations project beyond.
I don't mean like that. I mean like, do you connect with white people and then try to find a way to get them to use whiteness to benefit you?
Well, it's not really, like, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're asking, but what you're asking sounds more manipulative than I think leveraging privilege is in practice. So I have a friend who identifies as white. She co-runs a gallery, and since we've known each other, she has given me many opportunities to present my work at her gallery. And with each opportunity, it's also like a challenge for me to do new work. And I think without necessarily thinking of it as leveraging her privilege, that's exactly what she's done. You know, for some people who identify as white don't even realize that something as simple as like introducing you to somebody else in a field that you want to be more active in is leveraging your privilege, because, you know, business, art, writing, all of these little circles really function on nepotism. I mean, and within white circles, this means that white people just pass each other around, right? Like, hey, you want a job? Why don't you talk to my nephew, uncle's brother's roommate, you know? And when white identified people start putting people of color into that mix, that is leveraging privilege, right? You know, if you ask me for, I don't know, what do you do? Let me be more specific to you. What do you do? What's your work?
Are you asking me that?
Yeah.
Well, right now I work at home. I do social media evaluation. But I think your question was pretty good. I mean, your answer. So, and then also you answered another question I had, which was, do you have white friends? And you started it by saying yes. And then my other question was, do you, like, have sex with white people? But you don't have to answer that. You can answer the question, do you date white people?
Okay, so dating white people, I feel like it's something that everyone should try once. You know, like, people should be open to dating people, for sure. I feel like you can take on a lot of work, like extra homework, by being in relationships with white identified people as a person of color, because you have to do a lot of educating just to be comfortable in a relationship. And some people, that's not a big deal. And for other people, maybe not worth it. And I think it goes to each individual. You know, I definitely don't think that a person's race or identity should preclude them from being a potential partner or candidate for a partnership, because that's just close-minded and ridiculous. But if for you as an individual, you do not feel like the cost-benefit analysis is something that's working for you, then, of course, do what works for you. I live in the Pacific Northwest. It is, like, rife with white identified people. So if you're going to try to have an active social life here, you will be interacting with white identified people. It's almost impossible to avoid, either in a work context or in a social context. I have dated white identified people in the past. I don't know I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but my last experience was not a pleasant one. And I, you know, even if it wasn't a pleasant one with somebody who identified as Sikh, I probably would take pause before thinking, like, is this something I want to do again? Or have I recovered from the last time, kind of thing. I mean, I think it's just really easy to be hurt in that situation. Not that it's impossible to be hurt by another person of color, because it certainly is extremely possible. But those kinds of sort of ancestral hurts, the hurt of erasure, the hurt of rewriting history, those feelings can be triggered really quite easily when you are trying to have a relationship with somebody who identifies as white. I hope that wasn't a cop-out.
No, I appreciate your candor. Thank you very much for answering my questions. And that's all that I have. Thanks.
Thanks for dialing in. Love our folks in Georgia. The caller, Lady in New York, did you have a question for Natasha Marin?
Yes, may I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for taking my call, Gus, and thank you for taking my call as well to the guest. I do have two questions. Why did you choose to become a citizen of United States and Canada?
Okay, good question. I did not choose to become a citizen of Canada. I was 3 at the time, so that wasn't like a choice of mine. But I'm so grateful, and I'm extremely proud to be Canadian in a way that is actually quite anti-Canadian, because, you know, there's no country that's perfect. Canada has plenty of problems, but one thing I learned in Canada that has served me my entire life is how to make and be a friend. And I think all over the world, Canadians are known as being quite friendly. You know, our towers don't get bombed. And that's because friendliness, at least in the 1980s when I was growing up on the West Coast in Vancouver, was actually part of Canadian foreign policy, like kind of don't be an a-hole, you know, and I think that carries you far in life. It really does. I mean, I remember in elementary school having conflict resolution skits, being in classes with second, third, fourth graders all in the same class, kids with special needs in the same class, completely integrated. Like I grew up going to sort of hospice care homes and, you know, reading to the elderly and volunteering at soup kitchens. I mean, this is just part of a regular, banal Canadian educational experience. Also, as part of a typical public educational experience, you will also travel internationally by the time you graduate in 12th grade. I think that's great. Also, most Canadians I talk to can read and write and know things about basic nutrition. They care about the water. They care about their planet. And I just think that's great. Why did I become American? It was really more of a financial decision, I think. Like, if you try to work in this country or go to school in this country and you aren't American, it's prohibitively expensive. But I do have an immigrant experience, and I talk about that often, you know, that I think it was Chris Rock, like years ago, that said, like, you know, if you just come out of your mom's cooch in, like, Chicago and you're American, is that easier or worse than, say, like, swimming here and, like, filling out $3,000 worth of paperwork, et cetera? You know, like, who's really earned it, you know? I know I had to put effort into becoming American, and it was expensive as well. But it was worth it. It was definitely worth it. If only to just be able to allow myself permission to be outspoken and or obnoxious whenever I feel like it.
Okay. Thank you. My next question is, and this may not apply, so you can say, you know, I don't know what you're talking about. That has nothing to do with me. Doesn't affect me. But I'd like to know how racism has created a disconnect with you and other black people from around the world, such as America, Canada, or I believe you said you're from the Caribbean, being that you're well-traveled now, even with people from the Caribbean. How has racism, if it has, created a disconnect or conflict with you and other black people?
Well, you know, black people, I am a black person, right? And we're all different. Like, there's not this, like, homogenous black experience. When I travel, especially to brown countries, the first thing that I experience is just, like, joy. Just joy at having the white supremacy go down to, like, a hum as opposed to, like, a loud metalhead concert in the background. I really enjoy traveling to places like China, India. I'm going to be in Taipei next month, where when you turn on the TV, you don't have to look, like, the representation is different. I don't have a particular, like, disconnect association with black people anywhere. I feel very connected to black people. I feel very connected to all people, actually. But it just seems like, you know, other black people are more willing to also feel connected to me. So that's pretty natural and comfortable and feels really good. When I have conflicts with individuals, it is very individually based. I wouldn't say it has anything to do with my identity or theirs necessarily in terms of race. Many people, like the last caller, not the last caller, the caller before the last caller, kind of feel offended that I could be a capable, self-possessed, outspoken woman. And that's something that offends a whole variety of people, from white-identified women and white-identified men to black-identified women and black-identified men. People who desire tone police and or otherwise police me is amazing and outrageous, because I kind of wonder what they're getting from it, right? Like, I don't sit home at night wondering, like, if I should be telling you how to talk or walk or eat or anything. Like, it's just not my concern. But there are a lot of people who feel like that is their role. I have conflicts with those people. It doesn't matter what color they are, because I will be me, and I'm not going to apologize for it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. I did just want to get on the record. I think the previous caller, I don't think he said he had a problem with you being an outspoken woman. I think he just said that your responses were too long and that he had trouble understanding what you said.
Yes, but when a man tells a woman that her responses are too long, like, the appropriate response is like beep off to beep off at land. You know what I mean? Like, get on the beep train and get to beep off land. Because how dare you? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not telling you how to talk or how long you should talk or what you should say. And, like, from what planet do you come from where you feel like you can do that to me? That sounds like internalized oppression. Like, you need to get off on oppressing me or telling me how I should act or talk or walk or say or anything. That's ridiculous.
Oh, okay. I don't remember him telling you how to talk or, what to say. I think he just said that your responses were long for him and he had trouble understanding you. That seems very different than trying to dictate what you should say or even trying to oppress, just saying that. And particularly, I would say in the context of conversation about racism, because that is something that I have observed a lot, particularly with people who classify as white, where they will talk and not answer your question. So that is something that gets pointed out on this program regularly with responses, just, again, for integrity, because that's something that does come up frequently here. The person who dialed in 6769, did you have a question for Natasha Marin? You should be with us.
Hello?
976, yes, sir.
Oh, hi. Greetings, Gus and Natasha. My question is, earlier, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that you think that dating white people is something everyone should try once. Is that correct?
Yes. Wow. I think that people should be open-minded to making connections with people across the board. I would even go so far as to say, like, if you identify as heterosexual, perhaps contemplate the notion that perhaps heterosexuality itself is part of a white supremacist agenda, right? Because sexuality is super fluid. It's super fluid. You could put a man and a woman in a room. You could put a woman and a woman in a room. You could put a man and a man in a room. You could put two non-binary identified people in a room. You could put somebody in a room by themselves. Sex will happen. So I am a big proponent of, like, keep yourself wide open sexually and in terms of relationships, because you don't know. It's lonely out there. You don't know who you're going to connect with. And I think back on, like, my previous relationships and attachments I've had, I couldn't necessarily predict that I'd feel connected to those people based on what they looked like or what their sexuality was. So that's kind of the camp that I was coming from. Like, yeah, be open, for sure. I mean, if anything, it's a learning experience. And I think people should be open to learning experiences, good or bad.
Okay. My next question is, have there been any attempts by white people to buy your website?
To do what?
To buy your website.
To buy
or, like, buy your project.
Yes and no. Yes and no. And I know that sounds like a cop-out, but I'm trying to keep my answers short because I don't want people to get confused. Yes, people have expressed interest in this project in a monetary way. I have thought about it and maybe even still thinking about it. And I can't really get more in depth because things are still in the air. But I mean, it is my project, and I will oversee it the best I can, no matter sort of who else's hands are on it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for answering my questions. Thank you for taking my call, Gus.
For sure. The caller at 4789, did you have a question for Natasha Marin?
Hello, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Ms. Marin. I'm listening to you use a lot of metaphors. Like I heard you say open-minded, super fluid. I even heard you say lone wolf. But there are terms that you use that I was really curious about. One was family, and the other one was connectedness, and you were using those together. I was wondering if you had definitions for those two terms, and especially family. And I have another question after this.
Yeah, so family is complicated because there's obvious, your biological family is like one manifestation of family. But I think for many people in many cultures, family is much more extensive than that. And there is definitely in many cultures the idea of chosen family. And I have friends that I consider family. I don't see any difference between that. My definition of family would be sort of a recognition between one or more person of the capital T truth of their spiritual connection and or obligation to each other. And I've had people tell me many different theories, one being that perhaps before we are born, we select the people that we can do the best work with that will challenge us to evolve, and those people become our family. And for many of us, maybe we choose to incarnate multiple times and have experiences with these people. But I do know that from my personal experience, there have been moments where maybe I'm meeting somebody for the first time, and they just feel like they're my family. And it feels like a re-remembering, like a once again remembering of the person. So I definitely think there are spiritual and sacred aspects to the concept of family that go deeper and beyond like a biological connection, like a genetic connection. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I have just one last question. I was wondering, what is, or what do you think the value of your degrees is?
Well, that's an excellent question because, like, everything is the white tower of supremacy, right? When you say to somebody to make a point like, I have 2 degrees in the English language, and I know what the word reparations means. And so this, rebuke of this word, this allergy to this word by white supremacists is just, misplaced and non-sequential because it comes from a place of ignorance. Yeah, I am totally pulling on white supremacy to make my point because degrees, institutionalized learning, all of this is super problematic. The fact that I'm speaking English to you right now is problematic. But again, I believe that we have to use the tools that we have to do the work that we can in this moment. So just like passing is a strategy, assimilation is also a strategy. And to make my way in the world, I have an academic for a parent. And it was her hardcore belief that education is the way to go. And I do believe that. I do believe that no matter what your educational system is, whether it's traditional education or whether it's just an openness to learn from other people and other experiences, that kind of open-mindedness is like the way to salvation, is the way that we are all going to evolve as a species to see what we can really do together and individually. But, yeah, I think your question is excellent. What is the value? Well, it depends. Do I really believe, there is, a value that cannot be taken away from me that has to do with my degrees? Not really. I've actually joked many times on the phone with Sally Mae /Navians that they should just come repossess these suckers because, they're really not doing a whole lot for me. After I learned how to think critically, that was worth something. Was it worth $120,000? I'm not sure. In fact, I think it might be kind of a hustle for universities and colleges to be charging students at those institutions the same amount of money for different degrees. Because we all know that if you have an art history degree, you're not going to be making as much money as somebody with a computer science degree. The potentiality is just not there, you know? So the fact that, like, I don't know, education is hugely problematic, has a problematic history. Yes, I went to school. I didn't know what else to do. I mean, when you're 18 years old, what are you going to do? If I had it all to do over again, would I do it the same way? Probably not. Probably not, because I do not enjoy being hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt because I read a bunch of books and wrote some papers.
Thank you, Ms. Marin.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Last two callers. The caller at 2812. Did you have a question for Miss Natasha Marin?
Good evening. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Good evening to all the guests, and good evening. It's a two-part question. My first question is I want to make sure that I heard you accurately. You had mentioned that you thought that white people had isolated them, classifying themselves. They isolate themselves from people. Did I hear you correctly when you said that, ma'am?
I think you're talking about the part of the conversation a caller had called in and asked a question. In my response, I was saying that white supremacy doesn't just hurt people of color, that it also hurts white-identified people. And she asked in what ways, and I was saying, well, namely, like isolation, right? Because we have the human population. We have all the other people in the world, and then we have the people who identify as white. And I think we see a high number of, like, really violent, atrocious criminal acts perpetrated by white-identified people all across the world because of the fact that, like, loneliness and isolation breeds antisocial behavior. And we've seen this, like, across races, that this is what happens. Like, that's why community is so important. You know, that's why it's important to see, oh, Sharon's across the way. She needs something. Let me go check on her. Because if you don't go check on Sharon, months later, years later, she could be the one taking the Uzi into the club. You know what I'm saying? Like, because she wants to feel connected. So I think that white-identified people are actually suffering as well under white supremacy.
Right. Well, and I understand that, but the reason why I asked that was there are about millions of cases to where a lot of this isolation, even if you want to look at the U.S. in reference to like segregation, different laws, education now, to where that isolation is intentional. And it's intentional to keep themselves away from non-white people, but also to harm non-white people by not giving them all the information. And I just found that ironic that you mentioned that. And then the second part to that question was that if a lot of this isolation is intentional, do you also believe that some of your friends, that some of these people that you classify as your friends that are white, have you ever thought about the fact that they might be intentionally hiding information from you being a non-white person? And I'll mute my line.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think it's completely possible. I mean, for me to call somebody a friend means that we have a relationship that's based on trust, and it would be difficult for me to trust somebody if I was wondering, like in an active way. If they were hiding something from me, that's just not a good basis for a relationship in my book. I should say, like, when it comes to white-identified people, I tend to befriend more woke white people, people who can handle me disagreeing with them and not tone policing me and not mansplaining, white-splaining, over-splaining me, who can listen and who can share and who can exchange with me as an individual. So I don't run into that very often as an issue that I worry about with my friends.
Hey, Gus, can I ask one more question, Gus?
Concisely.
I will. Ma'am, how do you separate, have you ever thought about how you separate your quote-unquote friends from other white people who are suspected racist?
I didn't quite hear the end of what you said.
How do you separate friends from people that you might consider suspected racist? How do you separate your white friends from people that are suspected white racists?
Oh, I don't. I think that, like I said at the beginning, I think identifying as white is really problematic. And if a person identifies as white and they're my friend, there's a high likelihood that I've had this conversation with them. So many of my friends are in that place now where they've already had this conversation with me a few times, and they're trying to figure out how to, like, enact that next step. What does it look like to not identify as white, but be white and feel white inside? And I think challenging people is something that comes naturally with me as a friend, regardless of what your identity is. So I don't separate my white friends from racist. I think, like, at the moment in which you identify as white and you are breathing the air that I'm breathing and you're living in America, you have to actively go into your settings and, like, uncheck, you know, white supremacist patriarchy to, like, not by default have problematic racist ideations. I don't think it's possible to do that without making an effort every day in every moment. But I think that white identified people get very hopeless when you tell them basically, like, you're all, like, everyone's a racist, like, including people of color, quote unquote, using this word racist in the American context, which is super problematic, but meaning, like, everybody has their prejudices, and people of color have internalized racism and oppression as well, you know, so this is something we can all work on together. You know, the last caller asked me, like, about how do I value my degrees. That is also internalized racism, right? Like, in this circumstance where in which I have to kind of, like, take a white identified person down by sort of showing them who I am and what I know, I am using their tools. Like, that is me using their tools to make them see or recognize something about me, to leverage my privilege so that I can have more power in the situation, or just not be dismissed and or erased, right? But it's all very complicated. None of this is simple. But do my white friends think that I have given them some sort of pass? Like you're cool, but everybody else is a problem? No, absolutely not. They get challenged more often, more regularly.
Thanks, Gus.
For sure. The last caller, female caller in New York, did you have a question for Natasha Marin?
Thanks, Gus. Good evening, Miss Marin.
Hi.
Hello. I just had I didn't tune in at the beginning. I'm supposing that Gus gave you what his definition of racism, white supremacy was, and I'm not too sure what your response was. So I didn't know if you agreed with it, but I'm guessing by the tone of your conversation and what I have heard that you would agree that racism, white supremacy is a serious problem. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Do you believe that the use of sarcasm when discussing this problem is an appropriate means to convey the seriousness of this problem?
Well, I don't know. I don't really believe in tone policing people. I think that...
I'm sorry, you don't believe in what? I didn't hear you.
Tone policing.
Tone policing. No, I didn't say anything about tone policing, and I'm not too sure what that means, but I do know what sarcasm means because I think it's a term that you use. So my question simply is, do you believe that the use of sarcasm when discussing this topic is an appropriate means to convey the seriousness of this problem?
Yeah, I think that everything, all of the tools that one has at their disposal should always be used, for sure. In every circumstance, every time. If you have it in your repertoire, you should definitely be able to pull it out at your discretion at any time.
Thank you for taking my call, Gus. You've answered the question. Thank you for taking my call, Gus. I'll mute my line.
Right on. We nabbed all of our callers. I meant to ask this at the beginning of the program and just forgot to talk about priorities. Did you have any friends, family, people that you care about that were in the area of Hurricane Matthew, Caribbean or otherwise?
I do. I know a lot of people are pretty devastated right now. And the thing is, I mean, my goodness, this just keeps happening. You know, like it keeps happening and people are still denying like global warming and climate change are a thing, you know? And yet, with incredible frequency, these devastating natural events are happening and the same people are ignored. I mean, for me, I feel like when I kind of lost a little bit of my spirit was after Hurricane Katrina when, you know, white folks sent in boats to save the golden retrievers before they saved the people from the rooftops. And that made me really, really angry, you know, because you don't have to stand up and proclaim to the world that you're, you know, America World Police of the, like, let me be white savior to everybody, if that's not actually the case. Like, if that's not the case, then you can just keep that to yourself. Because it's not the case, right? You know, what are we doing? I have not seen the big press conference about all the aid that we're sending to Haiti. Have you? Did I miss that?
I missed that, too. Unless it happened since we've been on the air, I missed that, too.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything in the debates last night. I mean, I don't know. But foreign policy in this country seems to be about, like, who has money, who doesn't have money, who can we get money from. It's not really about humanity. It's really about that almighty dollar. That seems to be what motivates most of the people in power in this country. And that's really problematic because what is going to happen? If we can't help each other out at a time like that, you know, I don't know. It's very upsetting. And it's also not new. So it's got that, like, numbness attached to it, like, to survive yet another iteration of this same white supremacist foreign policy. We all have to become, like, a little bit more calloused and a little bit more numb because this isn't new and this isn't the first time, and I'm sure it won't be the last time either.
Unfortunate. Certainly our thoughts, sympathies with folks that you care about down in the, really everybody, but certainly you have people that are personally connected to what's happened with Hurricane Matthew. We had other callers, folks who participated in the program over the weekend who had people in the affected area as well. So definitely keep that in the forefront of our thought. The website again, reparations.me, reparations.me. I would encourage listeners, go make a request. That can be a little counter-racist experiment. You can see what happens, make your request, and try to be really creative with what you make your request for. And then you can let us know if you get it or what have you. That would be something I would be curious hearing about. Or if you get trolled, we want to hear about that as well. That would be good information. What was the name of the site you said where you were kind of cataloging some of it? It was Land of, what was it? I think Ass was in it somewhere. Land of, what was it?
Oh, on Facebook, if people want to see kind of what the trolls communicate, to look that kind of direct hatred, violent hatred in the eye, you can go to Shrine of Asshats. It's a Facebook event page. Also on the Reparations Me page, on the Troll Slayer page, there's a link to the Shrine of Asshats, and there's a list of everyone who has contributed as a troll slayer who is standing out effectively against this type of racist vitriol. And I also started a group called Operation White Shield for white people who would like to put their physical bodies between people of color and law enforcement. You know, to take it beyond that, ooh, I have feelings and I'm sad, to, like, what are you actually going to do to help?
I'm going to check all of those out. I will link Shrine of Asshats. I will link that in the description so that people can view some of the, and I said terror. I said that before I corrected myself. The terrorism that you and users have experienced with the site. And I think we had agreement there that that's what this is, saying that I have a rope to lynch you, a mother of 2 children, to go check out some of that for people that I think it is constructive just to look at it raw, unfiltered. This is white supremacy, racism, the problem. It has been a hoot having you on the program. I appreciate you hanging out with us for your Monday evening, Indigenous People Day, Columbus People Day, if folks are all into the holiday. But it has been grand dialogue. Thanks for taking questions from all of our listeners. And I'm going to make an effort to make a request today. So I will follow up and see how my request goes from reparations.me.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I will talk to you guys soon, I hope.
For sure. Have safe travels. You said you were packing your bags. Safe travels. We will be in touch soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Sure. Take care. Good evening. Context of white supremacy. Our guest, Natasha Marin, right here, Washington State. I don't know how many total guests this is that we've had from the Washington State area, but there have been quite a few. over the years at this point. Number one, I meant to get that in at the very beginning. That was 2 errors. I gave her the incorrect number, which delayed things a few minutes at the top of the program. And then I really did want to ask that at the very beginning, exactly as she stated. If you want to compare the destruction with Hurricane Matthew, particularly what happened in Haiti, where you've got probably upwards of 300 people, who knows at this point, and they're talking about sanitation issues, and this might exacerbate the cholera problem, which is still lingering from the earthquake and just total devastation against black people in that part of the world. But really keep that in the forefront and compare this with, the way that people have responded when they had the multiple attacks in Paris, or really anytime something happens in an area of the world that is predominantly white people. The response that you see and the outpouring and how they kind of keep that something that we should focus on and talk about for a long period of time, and making sure we, do our part to try to solve that problem. Just compare and contrast, see if you see that taking place with what's going on down in Haiti. I know we have people that are in the U.S. area, southeast region, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, where they also had some pretty major flooding. And I think they even had some loss of life in those areas as well. I hope we don't have folks that are suffering from that. I hope you're staying safe. If you had to evacuate, hopefully you didn't have any major damage or anything. But definitely, I know it is unpleasant, to say the least, in that part of the world right now. I hope you are able to navigate that as well as possible. Just quickly, a couple quick points I wanted to make. I guess number one, no, Thomas in New York, I did not kick you off the program. I think he got disconnected at some point and emailed if I kicked him off. No, sir, I did not kick you off the program. Now, I have used my mute button quite a bit. I did mute today just to try to quickly get through because we got more callers than I first noticed. But I do mute people if there's noise in the background or whatever the case, if they are, cutting a fool that day. I do mute people on occasion, but I would be hard-pressed, like if you challenged me to name the last time that I've actually kicked someone off the program. That is kind of a rare thing. Like, you have to be really, really like plucking Gus's nerves for me to actually kick you off of the program. So no, I did not, Thomas in New York. Moving forward, for folks who find any constructive value in the context of white supremacy, we should be here every day for the next 2 weeks. We'll be here tomorrow. Charlotte Green, black female. She has her own blog, website. This is the black female. She was a reporter in Alaska. She quit infamously on air, said F it. She was going to go and participate in the weed industry. Alaska is one of the states that has legal cannabis, recreational use of cannabis. So she started a cannabis club. She is now facing 14 counts and 54 years in greater confinement for various cannabis violations. But she will be on the program tomorrow. And as I said, when I talked with her, I already kind of let her know my stance about I'm in Washington State where it's also legal, but I do not think this is going to be anything that's going to be a great benefit to black people for kind of exactly what she is facing. I would certainly concede that this could be racist saying, this uppity wench, who does she think she is, thinking that she's going to clown like that and quit on our national television program. We will remind her how big the plan is. I certainly think that could be at work, and I also think it could be exactly what I've kind of been saying, that this is just a lot of rhetoric about if we legalize cannabis, this will keep at least some black people out of greater confinement. We'll stop harassing a number of niggers about cannabis violations. I just do not believe whites when they say that. You would really have to show me, and I don't. At any rate, tomorrow, you can tune in for that. So that's tomorrow. Wednesday, Anthony Morgan will be here. Canada, black male in Canada. I meant to say when she said about how friendly Canada is that I am sure Andrew Loku and his family would definitely challenge any notion of Canada being friendly. for Andrew Loku. But Anthony Morgan will be here on Wednesday. He is a black male attorney. He focuses quite a bit about racism, white supremacy in Canada. He has talked about the recent shootings that have happened in Canada over the last few years of black people, Jermaine Carby, Andrew Loku. There have been several other, and just incidents in general of white terrorism, the carding and what have you. He'll be here on Wednesday. Every Thursday we do the workplace racism segment. Friday, 5th installment, The Spook Who Sat by the Door. Saturday, the compensatory call-in. Sunday, the Global Sunday Talk on Racism. A week from today, white woman, she wrote a report. It was in the Washington Post and a couple other outlets where she was talking explicitly about white people do not want black people at their historically white institutions, and they have a variety of means of making sure that this happens. They will come up with excuses, lies. They will break all the rules and what have you. If it's a white person that they really want to hire. She just broke all of this down in the article. She'll be here on next Monday. Next Tuesday, the white male author of the book Blood at the Root, which talks about the white terrorism, racial cleansings in Forsyth County, Georgia. We talked about this before with Elliot Jaspin, Buried in the Bitter Water, Searching for Whitopia. The Forsyth incident has come up quite a few times on this program, but that his book specifically focuses on that incident. He'll be here next Tuesday, and then next Wednesday, so this would be October 19th, Allison Manswell. She's a black female. She wrote the book Listen In, which is about workplace racism, has suggestions, tips, talks about different ways that racism, white supremacy is practiced on the job. She'll be here next Wednesday. So then, again, workplace racism is every Thursday. We'll finish The Spook Who Sat by the Door next Friday. Next Saturday, compensatory call-in, and then Sunday. So this is the 23rd, all the way to October 23rd. Charles Woods will be here, black male. He's done quite a few lectures, talks on the history of racism and entertainment. Will be interesting to get his thoughts on Nick Parker's new project, as well as some of the other slave biopics, what he thinks about all this quote-unquote diversity in cinema now with Luke Cage and all the other things. Will be grand to have him on the program, but that is a week from Sunday. So that's every day for the next 14 days. We will be here hopefully doing something constructive. As it relates to the program today, thanks for the listeners for asking questions. This would be another program, even though it was not with a white person, where I would say the laughter was very important and early, very noticeable early. It stuck out within the first 5-10 minutes. I think I had a note about a lot of laughter. I think that's just something. I'm not even making a judgment on it. I just think it's something that should be noted in conversations on white supremacy, racism. People asking about metaphors. Woo! Right on, right on. One of the things that she said that I thought was very important. We had a lengthy exchange. Certainly, we didn't have a point of agreement on everything, but that's there's nobody I agree 100% with everything that they say. However, there was one of the things where we had complete agreement, even though I didn't make a big to-do of it during the broadcast. The point where she talked about that is an aspect of white supremacy, racism, us, black people, victims of racism, not seeking help, not asking for help. That is a major component of how we have been terrorized, victimized. They discourage black people have been beaten, killed, subjected to direct violence for asking help from other whites. That has happened historically, where you get brutalized to not even begin to think of asking for help. Now, they will call you a moocher, exactly what she said. They'll call you a moocher. They'll call you a slacker. You just want welfare. You just want a handout. Get out there and work. They say the same type of rhetoric, while nobody is a bigger moocher than white folks. Nobody. They don't just mooch a few coins. They will mooch your whole country. They will mooch everything. We talked about this when we had the program on 40 Hours and an Unwritten Rule. Black female author Kim Jefferson, where we were having that exact conversation where, I'm not saying that black people are perfect or anything of the sort, but man, if you're thinking about Bernie Madoff and some of these other whites, they don't just take a little bit, they take the whole pie and then some. I mean, they all. It is amazing when you just, as she stated, just go through and look at the history of what white have done. They are the poster child for handouts, welfare, mooching. Nobody does it better. In fact, lobbyists, that's all they do. These are paid moochers to go and beg, professionally beg. Give me this, give me that, give me. That's all they do all day long. And then if a black person should ask for anything, a crust of bread, a leftover bagel, oh my God, it's just welfare. Massive act of racism, and I think that is something that all of us, because I think many of us get conditioned. I remember we've made compensatory investment requests on air, and even some non-white people talked about how it was discomforting or dissettling because they felt that conditioning, that victimization, like, oh my gosh, you're asking these good white people, to help you, to get something. Nothing incorrect about asking for constructive help at all, ever, particularly if you're asking someone who has the ability to meet your needs. There's nothing wrong about that at all. I think all of us should try and get in the habit of asking for things that we need that are constructive, particularly if you can ask people who can meet your needs. Also, I thought it was really important, and just in a general sense, right? Like, because this comes up all the time. I lost count of the number of times that I heard it articulated in some way that white people don't know or are ignorant or are stupid, because that's so common. That's not one that's isolated to Natasha Marin. Like, I hear that all the guests, people that are here right now on the line, numerous times I hear that white people are so stupid. White people are so stupid. White people are so dumb. Our caller in Michigan, her infamous question, who is more confused about racism? Almost everybody says, oh, of course it's white people. White people, of course they're confused. Of course they're ignorant. Pair that, right? You hold the consistency of that trend on one hand. Then on the other hand, you consistently have black people, like our guest, saying that they underestimated white supremacy racism. That's exactly what she said today and in other interviews when she got all of the whites, race terrorists, race soldiers coming on and saying that she should be lynched and I got a rope to hang you up by a tree, and tormenting a black veteran trying to get a service dog. And they just go on and deliberately are tormenting and terrorizing this guy and making fake donations so he thinks he's got his goal of what he's trying to get. And they're just taunting him to have this go on and on and on. She said, I underestimated this level of commitment, dedication to racism, white supremacy. I hear that from black people all the time. Dr. Kamal Kambon, what did he say about Dr. King? That began to be his assessment near the end of his life, that this problem of white supremacy racism is bigger than what I originally figured. My assessment was off. I'm going to have to rethink this. The Black Panthers, if people saw Stanley Nelson's documentary, Vanguard of the Revolution, where Kathleen Cleaver, where she said, she was talking about COINTELPRO, where she said, we knew that we were being subjected to surveillance. We knew we were being followed. We knew, they had wiretaps, and we knew all that stuff was happening. We drastically underestimated the level of sophistication and the pervasiveness of what they were doing. I've heard that from Panther members consistently. I just heard that down the board. I put those two things together. To me, it seems very, very contradictory for white people to be stupid and at the same time victims of racism to be consistently underestimating white people. Something about that seems very, very off. In fact, I would say if we're consistently underestimating, maybe it's time for us to let go of the notion that white people are stupid about all of this. I contend that's one of the major problems. We consistently underestimate them, and I think that is directly related to thinking white people are stupid, they're not very smart, they're not very informed, and I can close all that up. They were just talking about I think it's the 45-year anniversary of the rebellion at Rikers, the prison in New York. They have documentaries and movies about this. They have a documentary with Samuel L. Jackson, pretty good film, Against the Wall. They have a scene before the rebellion kicks off. They have a scene where, this is not a documentary, obviously, Samuel L. Jackson, it's, a regular film, but they have a scene where they have multiple black inmates and they are upset about their just inhumane conditions, toilets that don't work, they're not allowed to use the showers, you just have all sorts of legitimate problems that should not be. And so they're talking to the guard, who is white, and they're saying, hey, this is a problem, blah, blah, and they have the book with all of the rules and regulation for the prison. And they're saying, this is in violation of code 6F and 6G, and you don't even know the rule. And he's, jumping up and down and yelling at the guard, and the guard has his nigger knocker, and he's just looking like, right. And he just goes off and leaves, and, the black guy's in the cell with the book, like, you're not going by the rules, you don't even know the rules. And I said, that is about the size of it. If I know I have the key and you don't, I know about enough to dominate this whole situation, regardless of how much you think you know. For me, and this is just my own code, I really am not interested in hearing anyone talk about how dumb white people are about racism, how dumb they are in general. As long as white supremacy exists, the proof I would need to substantiate the intellectual ineptitude of whites would be an end to racism. Short of proving that, I have zero interest in hearing anything else about how smart white people, how stupid white people are, how uninformed they are about racism, or anything else. Moving forward, last comment I will get in, just the term privilege. I've said for years, I don't think that's the most accurate term to describe what it is that we're talking about, for a variety of reasons, particularly once, and I've said this before too, once it begins to move to non-white people having privilege too, at the end of the day, Dylan Roof is not practicing privilege going to Mother Emanuel AME Church. That is terrorism. That's what we're talking about. Privilege is the way that whites like Timothy Wise, Dr. Peggy McIntosh, Jane Elliott, and the list just goes on and on and on. All of these whites, that is the way that they are comfortable talking about privilege, which seems very fluffy and friendly, and we could talk about that and have Don Lemon and do a conversation on CNN, and everybody will feel great. White power, white terrorism, that is what produces all of these incidents that we've been talking about, the Flint water situation, all of the different police shootings where no one gets indicted. That is white power, white terrorism, white dedication to dominating, abusing, ravaging black people. That is not privilege. It is not just I have some goodies that I wake up with and that makes my life better. No, I get these goodies by stomping on you niggers forever and taking anything I want from you anytime I want, including your very life. That is about power, not privilege. I will stop there. I am concerned. I have two concerns. Number one, I'm not really interested in having I didn't agree with the guest, or I have a different view from her perspective, because that's, logical. That happens frequently. Not a big deal. But I'm not really interested in that. I do want to watch, how we talk about other victims, even victims we don't agree with. I didn't hear anyone suggest that she was functioning as a white person, accepted as a white person. That's one. My second concern is because we have programs for many days on end. I don't necessarily feel like I have to go all 3 hours, since we will be back tomorrow. So I can tolerate a few concise remarks if you're not going to talk bad about another victim. If you just have a point that you want to raise, that is fine. Great. One thing that I will ask, if anyone thought that Gus was incorrect or mistreating Miss Marin, she didn't say that, but if anyone thought I was mistreating Miss Marin when I did raise or just make my view known, that I did not think when the male caller said that he thought some of her responses were long and he had a difficult time understanding what she said, and I said that that was not my view, that he was mistreating her. It was not my view that he was trying to oppress her or dictate, what she said, what words she used, or how she spoke. I think he just said that he did not understand her responses, and a part of that he expressed was because she took a long time to give her answers. That has been said many times on this program, talking to male guests, female guests, white guests, non-white guests. It's something that I think we should all be alert for in conversations on racism, because people do have a tendency to do that, yours truly included, to talk a long time and either not answer your question or to not be as coherent, maybe even concise as they could be to respond. So I didn't think he was mistreating her. I didn't think that was any form of oppression or what have you. I certainly didn't think it was on the basis of her being an outspoken woman, as she said. But if anyone thought I was in error, please speak up and let me know that. But if you have anything concise that we can do in like 8 minutes, let's hear it now.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think you were in error mistreating her in regarding to the length of her response. My comment was this show definitely helped me to cement my definition of white power and white privilege. Really helped me cement that the word white privilege is a joke, and how it is trying to make the use of that word is just trying to dull down what these racists are practicing, which is white power. And there's no PG version of white power. Either it's they're practicing racism, exercising their white power, or not. So I'm really happy that I listened in tonight because that gave me some clarity. Thank you. I will mute my line.
Grand. Anybody else, anything they can get in, being concise before we rock and roll?
Can I add something?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just thought, the use of metaphors was really interesting. The term superfluid, that was really interesting. And I also just wanted to, if you could consider adding pronouns to your list of things that we should watch out for, metaphors and pronouns, because I think pronouns are also extraordinarily dangerous in the English language. And that is all. Thank you.
What's your beef with pronouns?
They add a lot of confusion in terms of not clarifying who exactly we're speaking to or about. So if somebody makes a statement and they have they in their sentence, or we, because we could mean a lot of things, or they could mean a lot of things, or if in their sentence they have multiple people or multiple subjects that they're talking about, and they use the word he or she, and it's not clear as to who they are talking about, it can create a lot of confusion, and it is used, I have learned in my small studies, if I was to say, that they are used a lot in a lot of business, like commercials and marketing, where you're not really sure who they're talking about, and you might include yourself in there. Like if they say they, and you think that they're speaking about you, but you're not the person that they're talking about.
That is interesting. I will have to make a note of that in the future. I have noted, specifically when people say, they too, you already mentioned they, but when people say we, and exactly as you stated, sometimes I'm unclear as to if that we is inclusive of whites or, just who all is included in the we. I have noted that consistently. And even with terms like Americans, sometimes that's kind of a vague one in terms of who exactly is being referred to.
Just to add just a little bit more information, sorry. I took the GMAT, which is like the business, to the exam to get into business school. And in that exam, the English portion of it, pronouns are the major confusing, I don't know how to make this, they're the major component of confusion in sentences. So that they create confusion for all of the other elements in the English language, because people don't know whom the sentence is directed to. That's why, in most English sentences, if they start out with, let's just say, someone's name, let's just say this, it said Gus T Renegade, it'll be a comment, and it'll talk about it because it is highlighting Gus T Renegade. And if it says another person in there, then it has to highlight that other person. And then when it's talking about you again, it needs to highlight you again, because if we say him, there's massive confusion. And it is a major component of confusion in sentences, and it is used. And that is probably the hardest exam on the planet. And it is probably the hardest exam I've ever taken. And the major, even me, I would be confused in terms of I would get questions wrong because of the use of pronouns. Like, I would think that they're talking about this person, and then I'll just be completely wrong. So, yeah, that's my little sorry. Thank you.
No apologies. That is, I will have to think about that. That is good information. We have 3 minutes left. Folks being concise. And, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm taking you off the program now.
What happened, Gus, was I got put into a call thing, and it said, you've been put into another call room. It is like, press 1 if you like to go back to your call. And when I pressed 1, it had that music that plays when you're not there. The do-do-do-do-do-do-do. So I said, did Gus kick me off the show? But I thought that the victim was very confused. And one of the reasons why I say Area 8 activity, a no-no. And it's going to be hard to break that confusion for her because of that. A caller said that I was ignorant, or I asked an ignorant question, and I just wanted to know why, because I was confused. So I asked her, did she say that she was dating a white person, and she said no. And that was the only question I asked about that. So I was confused as to why that person would call me ignorant.
Oh, is that caller still with us? I didn't, I'm not sure if I remember the line exactly. The person who said...
The caller went on to say how if everyone was involved in these type of relationships, you'd get a better understanding of people, or something to that effect as well.
Caller still there, or... I would appreciate it hearing that one explained if the person is still with us.
Thank you, Gus, for taking my call. And I'll mute my line. Thank you. Have a good evening.
For sure. They chime in before we get ready to sign off. I'll get the response. Is somebody else going to chime in?
Yes, this is Ross. I just wanted to chime in because I do agree with Thomas. I think that she was very confused as well, especially once she got to the point where she felt that black people should have tragic arrangements with white people. I just was like, that really solidified the confusion aspect for me. But as a fellow Trinidadian, I wanted to get her take on racism itself and the differences she saw between the U.S. and here and Trinidad. Excuse me. And I felt even those answers, they were pretty good, but they were also, to me, they also had a little confusion, and it kind of compelled me to ask about Dr. Wilson, because I just thought maybe, I figured she did not know about the book, but she did confirm. She said she heard of it, but she didn't read it. And then I thought about, after having a discussion with Thomas in New York, about just the white validation aspect and the fact that, I don't know how well her work would reach her outside of giving her more insight into the concept of genetic annihilation and, how real it really is as far as motivating their actions and behaviors. Thank you, and I'll mute my line.
Gus, can I ask a question really quickly? Did she expand on or tell about any of the benefits that black people have gotten from her website? Is there a list somewhere that we can go to check where black people have indeed received some sort of what she quotes as reparations from white people?
Oh, yeah. It's on the website. It has a section where it has, offers and then, I forgot the exact. It's either fulfilled or reparations that meet. But you can see, what people requested and then what they got, people that asked for either direct money, and if they got that, or if somebody asked for a car, I think they got that. There's all kinds of stuff. Art supplies, meals, spa treatment, help with homework, lots of stuff, all kinds of stuff.
Okay. I'll go look at it, and I'll try to think of something I need to ask for, see how that works out.
I'm serious about that. I'm going to fill out something today. I think I'm going to put a phone on there. I would like a phone. I'm going to figure out probably two things, because it seemed like people were making multiple requests. So, yeah, you should figure, even if it's not something like material, if you want to be able to ask a white person questions or, whatever, go ahead and make your request and just see what happens. If you get trolled, that would be great. Take screenshots and so you can share with the group.
Absolutely.
That would be great, too. If you make a constructive request and you get it, awesome, spectacular.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
I say we ask for justice.
Might want to be a bit specific. See if we can come up with enough specific things to get there. At least that's in my mind. That's how I'm processing it, because I suspect that one they would just clown and they would just practice racism and keep it moving. Which might be interesting, on top of it, just to see how they respond to just being that specific. Justice. Stop practicing racism immediately. Keep it moving. We will be here tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Charlo Green joining us live from Alaska. Going to be a hoot. We'll be looking forward to chatting with her. And she said that she felt like, she just said that it seemed people were not as interested in her legal battle, facing possible 54 years in greater confinement, that people knew about her quitting on air and everything. But in terms of, having this court battle for her life, basically 54 years, that was not as popular. I did see an article on it in the USA Today, The Guardian, the Young Turks covered it last week. It did get some attention, but it was not, the most talked about thing. Not in the way that when she quit originally, not in the same way that was. But that'll be tomorrow. If you have questions, observations, thoughts, guest suggestions, gripes, feel free. You can drop an email untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. I would definitely put a Seattle tag on this program. This very much to me seems like, oh yeah, this is indicative of the Seattle area, which you can expect if you come up here and have dialogue on racism. Very much flavor of Seattle. But we'll be here tomorrow. Looking forward to hearing from it. I hope folks got constructive information that they can use from this evening. And if you go to the site, reparations.me, to make a request, I'm serious about that. Let me know how it goes. If you get it, awesome. If you get trolled, awesome. Whatever happens, just let us know. I think that could be an interesting experiment, depending on what you request and how it turns out. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I hope we didn't miss any callers with questions. Good to hear from our caller down in Georgia. It had been a minute. Glad to hear from you. And we will speak to everyone in about 24 hours. I will state again, sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. You never know when today is going to be the day that you bump into Daniel Holtzclaw, Darren Wilson, any of these other race soldiers, badge or no. You do not want to be under the influence. That's cigarettes, alcohol, whatever. You do not want to be under the influence where you're not really able to process things and make the best possible decisions. White power is war against black people in all areas of people activity worldwide. Our behavior as attempted counter-racists should reflect that understanding at all times. In my view, that would mean sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. That said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.